I arrived in the village late in the day, sometime around 6. The sun was low and golden, spilling long shadows across the hills. I was hiking through a more remote region in the north, a kind of personal trip to reset after quitting my job. I had packed light, just a change of clothes, a sleeping bag, a few protein bars, and a foldable map. No real plan, just a line I drew with my pen connecting small paths and back roads. I liked the idea of not knowing exactly where I was going. The village wasn't on my map. That was the first strange thing. It had no name signs, no road markings, no welcome board. I had come down through a thin forest trail, and the land opened up suddenly into a wide valley. There were fields, stone houses, a small church with a sloped roof, and what looked like a bell tower that hadn't rung in a while. I stood there for a while, just looking at it. It had that stillness you only find in old places. No dogsbarki, no music, just the wind pushing through the grass. I walked down into the village, thinking I could ask for water or a safe place to sleep. As I got closer, I noticed how well kept everything was. The homes were clean, painted in faded whites and grays, their roofs dark and solid. The roads were dirt, but not muddy or broken. Everything looked used, but cared for, lived in. I didn't see any people at first, but there was smoke from chimneys and the soft clinking sound of tools or dishes here and there. I didn't feel afraid, just cautious. I figured people here were quiet, maybe private. That's not rare in rural places. I found a bench near what looked like a general store, and I sat down. My legs were sore, and I let myself rest. That's when I noticed the cemetery. It was behind the church, slightly up a hill. From where I sat, I could see the tops of the headstones, short, thick, weathered things. I could also see that none of them had names. No letters at all, just flat slabs, all the same size, evenly spaced. At first, I thought maybe they were just markers, placeholders for actual graves somewhere else. But they looked old. A few had moss on them. Some had little stones or dried flowers placed carefully on top. It felt strange, but not frightening, just strange. That night, I found a small barn at the edge of the village with loose boards and no lock. I lay down in the hay, used my sleeping bag, and fell asleep. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up. I needed to pee, and my legs were cramping. I got up, stepped out quietly, and walked toward the edge of the village where the air felt fresher. That's when I saw the light. A group of people holding lanterns, walking up toward the cemetery. Maybe 5 or 6 of them. They moved slowly, in a line, with a kind of careful rhythm. I crouched down behind a low wall and watched. They were carrying something. A body. I didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe it was a bundle of cloth or tools. But then I saw the feet. Bora, pale, lifeless. It was a man, wrapped in dark fabric, tied at the ankles and under the arms. His head rolled loosely as they carried him. They moved through the gate of the cemetery, still in total silence, and began digging. I watched from behind the wall for over an hour. I couldn't see everything, but I saw enough to understand they were burying him. They didn't cry. They didn't say anything. When the body was in the ground, they covered it, placed one of the blank slabs on top, and walked away. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I crept closer to the grave. The dirt was fresh. There were marks from shovels. I stood there, staring at the new grave, and felt a tight coldness in my chest. Something about it was off, not just because it was secretive. It was the way they had done it, quick, silent, mechanical. I went back to the barn, curled up, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. The next morning, I walked into the village again. I wanted to leave, but part of me was still curious. I hadn't spoken to anyone yet, and I needed to at least ask which road to take next. I passed by a woman sweeping her steps, an old man feeding chickens, a boy carrying water from a pump. Everything seemed normal. Then I saw him, the man they buried. He was standing near the church steps, facing the village square. He wore the same jacket I saw him buried in. Same build, same gray hair. I froze. He was alive, or something like it. I stared, trying to be subtle. He didn't look quite right. His skin had an odd tone, like it had been stretched too tight. His eyes didn't move. He just stared forward. His arms hung stiff at his sides, and when he did shift his weight, it was awkward, off balance, like someone learning to walk again. No one else looked surprised to see him. I left. I walked back up the trail I had come from, but after 30 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The path didn't look the same. Trees I remembered weren't there. The incline was different. I checked my map. Nothing matched. It felt like the trail had changed overnight. So I turned back, told myself I'd rest another day, and try again. I spent that second night in the same barn. This time, I barely slept. I kept listening for footsteps or voices, but the village was silent again. Around the same time, 2 o'clock or so, I heard shovels. I got up and looked again. Another procession. A smaller body this time. Maybe a woman. Same routine. Same silent burial. By morning, I walked through the village slowly, scanning each face. Sure enough, near the bakery, I saw a woman I hadn't seen before, standing too still, blinking too slowly. She had a cut on her cheek that looked too clean, like it had been drawn with a knife and then healed overnight. She didn't speak. None of them did. And the others, the ones who hadn't been buried, they went about their lives like nothing was wrong. I started watching them more carefully. Their hands, their walks, their breathing. Over the next day and a half, I began to notice a pattern. The ones who seemed off all shared certain things. They stood longer without moving. They blinked less often. They ate, but the food was left barely touched. They didn't react to noise or touch. And the villagers didn't acknowledge any of this. I counted at least 7 people who looked that way. Each one had stiff movements and a faint, sour smell like dried meat or old wet cloth. I stayed longer than I should have, trying to understand. One afternoon, while wandering near the cemetery, I found a small shed. Inside were shovels, thick gloves, ropes, and a few large syringes. All used. No labbits. In one corner, a bucket filled with pale gray water and rags. The smell hit me hard. Chemical. Rotting. I backed out and ran behind a hill until I caught my breath. That night, I stayed awake. I waited for the burial group again and followed them at a distance. After they left the cemetery, I slipped in and dug. I had to know. It took me nearly an hour with my bare hands and a stick. When I reached the body, I stopped. The man's chest was cut open. Hollow. His organs were gone. In their place were glass tubes, metal plates, and what looked like a battery pack. His face had small stitch marks near the ears and jaw. There were tubes under the skin, feeding down into the chest. It wasn't a man anymore. Not exactly. It wasn't a robot either. It was something in between. I covered it back up and left without a sound. The next morning, I walked out of the village as calmly as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't run. Just a steady pace through the fields until I reached the trees. The paths were different again, but this time I just kept going. I walked until my legs gave out, then I slept, then I walked again. It took me 3 days to reach a proper road. Eventually I got back to the city. I told no one. I thought maybe I was sick imagining it. But then I started to read, quietly online, articles buried deep, mentions of villages with no deaths, places that never report deaths, no names on graves, no burial records, and then scientific papers, one from the 90s, research on synthetic preservation of tissue, one from 2003 about postmortem nerve stimulation, another about experimental memory retention after death, using a kind of electric pulse. It matched what I saw. They weren't coming back to life. They were being repaired, cleaned out, wired up, puppet. Why? I don't know. Maybe it was some test program. Maybe someone was funding it or trying to prove something. Maybe the villagers were part of it willingly. Maybe they weren't. But I do know this. No one truly dies in that village. And whatever comes back isn't really them. I can still see their faces. Blank. Still. Waiting. I never went back. I started the hike a little after sunrise alone. I had taken a few weeks off work for the first time in years, and I told myself I'd spend it somewhere remote. I didn't want to see cities, and I didn't want to see people. I wanted quiet. That's why I chose the Ridge Trail through the Lesser Roa Hills. Not many people hike that route. No famous landmarks, no visitor centers, just long stretches of dry land, forested slopes, and valleys that haven't changed in decades. That's what I wanted. The morning was cool, and the sun had just cleared the horizon. I walked steadily, following the narrow dirt path that wound up along the hills. Birds were chirping, and the only sounds around me were the rustle of the wind and the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. My backpack was heavy with water, jerky, oats, and a thin sleeping bag. I had no specific destination, just a plan to hike out for 3 days, make camp each night, and return the same way. That way, I didn't need to worry about getting lost. About 4 hours into the hike, I stopped at a rocky outcrop to catch my breath and drink. From there, I could see down into a wide valley below. The land dipped sharply, covered in a patchy spread of pines and flat grassland in the middle. I sat on a flat rock, took out my small pair of binoculars, and scanned the view. At first, it was nothing unusual. Just land, trees, rocks. But then I saw it, a village. Small, maybe 15 or 20 buildings. They were nestled along a narrow stream that curved through the valley. I could see rooftops, a dirt path winding through the middle, a couple of square plots that looked like gardens, and even a windmill or water pump near the stream. I blinked a few times, unsure how I'd missed it before. It didn't look abandoned. The buildings were intact. Some even had laundry lines with faded fabric hanging. There was smoke rising thinly from one of the chimneys. Not thick enough for a fire, but enough to mean someone had been there recently. I adjusted the focus. On one of the rooftops, I saw a figure standing. I didn't understand it at first. The figure wasn't moving, but I could clearly make out arms, legs, and a head. Just standing there. Then the figure raised an arm, slowly like a wave. I lowered the binoculars. Nothing. No village. Just empty fields where it should have been. I raised the binoculars again. The village was still there, exactly as before. My first thought was that it was some kind of mirage or optical illusion. Maybe heat off the ground was distorting light. But it wasn't that hot yet. It was barely 10 in the morning. I took out my phone and used the camera, zooming in as far as it could go. Nothing. No village. I tried holding the phone to the binoculars, but the image wouldn't align properly. I spent almost an hour there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The village was always visible through the binoculars, always in the same spot, and always missing when I looked with my own eyes. Even when I closed one eye or changed positions on the rock, it didn't change. Eventually, I decided I had to check it out. The slope into the valley was steep and uneven. There was no trail leading down, so I picked my way carefully through loose rock and brush. It took maybe an hour to reach the valley floor. I walked toward where I'd seen the village, exactly where it had been. But when I got there was nothing, not even ruins, just dry grass and a few scattered bushes. The stream I'd seen wasn't there either. No water, no windmill, nothing, just empty land. It was flat and quiet. I stood in the middle of the empty field and turned in a full circle, checking my bearings. I was exactly where the village had been through the binoculars. The hill I'd come from was right behind me. I walked in every direction for a few hundred meters just to make sure I wasn't slightly off. Nothing. No signs of old buildings. No stones or foundations. No paths or fencing. Just land. I climbed a nearby rise, pulled out the binoculars again, and looked back toward the same direction I'd seen it from earlier. The village was still there. Same layout, same buildings. The figure on the rooftop was gone, but the chimney was still smoking faintly. I could see laundry still on the line. I scanned left and right. All the buildings were solid. Doors, windows, fences. Everything looked real, but it was only visible through the binoculars. When I looked with my eyes, it was just the same open field. I sat down and tried to reason it out. It couldn't be a hallucination. I was hydrated, rested, and clear-headed. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe the binocular lenses were picking up an image from somewhere else. That made some sense, but the surrounding landscape matched perfectly the slope of the hills, the tree-line, even the bend in the valley. If it was a reflection, it had to be from very nearby. And I hadn't seen a single sign of a real village anywhere else on the hike or the area maps. I took photos again with my phone through the binoculars this time. After several tries, I managed to get one clear enough that it showed a roof and part of the laundry. But when I checked the photo later, the image was blurry and the building barely visible. Nothing I could show to prove what I saw. I stayed in that valley for another few hours, walking its edges, climbing a couple of the small hills around it. I even used some stones to mark out where I thought the village buildings had been, based on the binocular view. Then I hiked back up the slope the same way I came. When I reached the original rock outcrop again, I set up my small camp there for the night. I didn't feel like moving farther. Something about the whole thing left me unsettled. I wasn't scared exactly, just confused and uneasy. I kept thinking about the person waving. What were they waving for? To greet me? To warn me? I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up every hour, checking around with my flashlight, feeling like someone might be watching me. Of course, there was never anything, just wind and the occasional owl. The next morning, I got up before dawn. I took the binoculars again and looked down into the valley. The village was still there, but something was different. The laundry was gone. The smoke from the chimney had stopped. One of the doors was wide open. There were no people that I could see. I sat there, staring through the lenses for a long time. Then I noticed something odd. The rocks I'd used to mark the layout of the village were there, but not as I'd placed them. They were arranged into a crude circle, with a few more stones added in the center. I hadn't done that, and I hadn't seen any sign of people down there. I hadn't heard anything, but somehow someone or something had changed it. I couldn't explain that part. It wasn't animals. Stones don't move that way on their own. I packed my things and started walking again. I kept heading east, deeper into the hills. Part of me wanted to just turn back, but I didn't. Maybe I didn't want to admit I was spooked. Maybe I thought I could find another angle, another hill where I could catch a glimpse of the real location. Around noon, I found another high point with a wide view. I scanned the valley from there again. Same village, no people. But now, one of the buildings looked damaged. Part of the roof had collapsed inward, like it had burned or fallen in. I looked again with my eyes. The actual land was unchanged, still flat, still empty. I marked my position on my map and wrote notes about everything I saw. I even recorded voice memos on my phone, talking through my thoughts, hoping that maybe later I'd make sense of it. The rest of that day passed slowly. I didn't see anyone else on the trail. I barely ate. My mind kept going back to the village. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something obvious, that there was a logical explanation just out of reach. I made camp again near a small creek. The stars were clear overhead, and the cold kept me curled in my bag. That night, I dreamed I was walking through the village, but everything was silent. Doors hung open and windows were smashed. And at the far end of the village was a mirror, just standing there, full length, upright in the middle of the path. I saw myself in it, but I wasn't moving, just staring. I woke up sweating. On the third day, I decided to head back. But instead of retracing my path exactly, I looped slightly north, trying to get a wider view of the valley from a different angle. That's when I saw something that made my stomach twist. On a slope of earth near the north ridge, just a few hundred meters from where the village should have been, was a shallow pit. Not natural, dug maybe 6 feet wide, for feet deep. A few broken wooden beams were sticking out of the edge. Old boards, rotten. I climbed down into it, and under the soil I saw the outline of stone foundations. A house, or would have been a house. I pulled my small trowel from the pack and started clearing dirt away carefully. After about 20 minutes, I uncovered the corner of what looked like a wall, stone stacked with mud mortar, maybe a century old. Then I found a hinge, rusted, still half attached to a rotting piece of wood. A door hinge. There had been buildings here, a long time ago, but no village stood anymore. I kept digging. I found pieces of ceramic, charred bits of wood, nails, signs of fire, and bones. Small ones. Animal maybe, maybe not. By late afternoon, I was covered in dirt, shaking from adrenaline, crouched in the middle of a pit filled with traces of a place that no longer existed, but still appeared, somehow, through a pair of binoculars. That was the moment I realized what was happening. Or at least, I didn't even mean to stop in that village. I hadn't planned for it, hadn't seen it on the map, and wouldn't have gone near it if not for the road closure on the highway. I was driving south, away from the cities and noise, taking a 2-week break after losing my job. The company said they were downsizing, but I knew the truth. I'd become a ghost at the office. No one spoke to me. My manager barely looked me in the eye. I left without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove for hours that day. The last proper town I passed through was small but modern. Petrol station, coffee shop, Wi-Fi. I filled up the tank, had a terrible sandwich, and kept going. By late afternoon, my GPS sent me down a narrow back road. apparently the only alternative due to the main highway being closed. The trees thickened on both sides. My reception dropped to zero. I remember the silence. Not even birds. Then the village showed up. There were no signs leading to it, no welcome boards, no mention of its name. I saw it only after I came around a bend, and the trees gave way to a sudden clearing. Small stone houses, sloping roofs, a narrow main road of dirt and gravel. Maybe 20 or 30 buildings at most. No guayers overfed, no satellite disches, no cars parked anywhere. It looked like a place untouched by time. I pulled in slowly. The road beneath my tires crunched louder than I expected. I rolled the window down. Still no sound. No footsteps, no dogs barking, no wind. I drove past the houses, some with shutters drawn, others with windows open but curtains pulled tight. A few faces peeked out from behind glass, then disappeared. I parked near what looked like the village square. There was a water pump in the center and a few wooden benches around it. Just past it stood a building slightly larger than the others. Whitewashed walls, a short tower with a rusted iron bell. A church, I assumed. It was nearly dusk by then. The sky had gone a pale orange and long shadows reached across the square. I stepped out of the car and stretched. I considered knocking on one of the doors, asking if there was a place I could sleep for the night, or if I could set up my sleeping bag near the church steps. But something stopped me. I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way. There were eyes on me. I could feel them just out of sight. Still, I was too tired to drive on. I sat on the bench closest to the church and took out a bottle of water. I drank half of it in one go, wiped my mouth, and checked my phone again. No signal. That was when I first saw the wall bleed. It was on the church's right side. A large, plain wall, nothing on it. No windows, no crosses, no carvings. As the last of the sun dipped behind the trees, the whitewash darkened in a single spot, a patch near the center. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But then it thickened, spread, dark red. It wasn't a splash. It seeped from the wall like sweat. It was slow but constant. Thin red rivulets slid down the wall and pooled at the base, staining the dirt. I stood, took a step closer. A figure appeared from behind the church. An old man, bald, with a long gray coat. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, then back at the wall. A few more people came. Women, children, a man carrying a sack over his shoulder. All of them silent. All of them faced the wall as if it were normal. As if nothing about a bleeding wall at dusk deserved alarm. I kept my distance. I watched them. None of them touched it. They stood in a wide half circle, maybe 6 feet away from the base. Some bowed their heads. A few kneeled. After 10 or 15 minutes, they all turned and left at once, walking away without speaking. The last of the sunlight faded and the wall stopped bleeding. I walked up to it once they were gone. The stain was still wet. I squatted and sniffed the air. It smelled metallic, like iron. Blood, real blood. I didn't touch it. I slept in my car that night, parked just outside the village. I locked the doors and pulled a blanket over myself. I couldn't sleep for hours. My heart kept racing. My mind replayed the image of that slow, wet trickle down the church wall. I tried to tell myself it was pain, a trick. Maybe someone in the village set it up as a ritual, some rural tradition. But it looked too real, too organic. The next morning, the wall was clean. Not a smear left. I walked up to it again, examined every inch. Dry smooth. I tried to find cracks or holes. Nothing. I wandered through the village. People were out, walking, carrying baskets, tending small gardens. They didn't look at me. Or if they did, it was brief and cold. I tried waving at a boy sitting on a low stone wall. He jumped down and ran inside. I noticed something strange. No one ever stood too close to the church. They walked wide around it, even if it meant taking a longer route. Even during the day, I stayed another night. Same thing happened. As the sky darkened, people gathered. The wall bled. They stood, watched, and then left. I stayed hidden in the shadows, half behind the corner of another building. Again, no one touched the wall. Again, it stopped once the sun disappeared. Again, it smelled like blood. On the third night, I touched it. I waited until everyone had gone, until the last of the red had begun to slow. I approached slowly, hand out. My fingers shook. I pressed two of them against the wall, just above where the liquid was darkest. It was warm, sticky. My skin came away, slicked and red. I sniffed again. Iron. Blood. Then I felt something shift inside me. It was like a shiver, but deeper, like it came from inside my spine. I clenched my teeth and wiped my hand on my jeans. I backed away from the wall, feeling stupid, dirty, and somehow violated. I went back to my car and sat there for hours, not sleeping. The bleeding started the next day. Not from the wall, from me. It was around 6 in the evening. I'd driven a few miles away, finally able to catch a weak signal on my phone. I stopped in a field to check messages. As the sky turned orange again, I felt a sting in my palms. I looked down and saw blood. Tiny drops, just below the base of each finger on both hands. It welled up, slowly, as if from inside the skin. There were no cuts. Nothing I could see. Just blood oozing out. I panicked. I grabbed tissues from the glove box, tried to wipe it away. It kept coming. Not fast, but steady. I wrapped my hands in cloth. By nightfall, it stopped. I returned to the village the next morning. I had to. I wanted answers. I thought maybe someone there would know what was happening. But when I arrived, the village was empty. Not abandoned, just empty of people. Every window shuttered, every door closed. No voices, no footsteps. I tried knocking. No answer. I went to the church. The wall was clean again. No one around. That night, I bled more. It became a pattern. Every evening, as the sun dipped, my palms began to bleed. It was never enough to make me dizzy, but enough to soak through gauze. I started carrying bandages everywhere. I bought gloves. I didn't go to hospitals. I knew they'd never believe me. There were no wounds, no obvious cause. I researched. I drove to libraries, used public computers. I searched medical databases, journals, news reports. Nothing matched. No similar symptoms. No disease that fit. It was like my body had been triggered by something. Like a mechanism had been switched on. I couldn't find that village again. I tried retracing my path. I drove for hours along back roads. Forests, fields, rivers. I remembered all the landmarks, but the bend where the trees opened up never came. The GPS still showed nothing. It was like the village never existed. I gave up after a week. Now it's been months. Every evening, my palms bleed. Always at dusk. Always slowly, methodically. I've taken to wrapping my hands an hour before sunset. My clothes are stained. My home smells like a clinic. I live alone. I haven't told anyone. But I know what happened. The wall wasn't bleeding. It was purging. It was giving something away. Or maybe it was taking something in. The villagers treated it like a ritual. They stood close but never touched it. Maybe they knew. Maybe it was part of their lives, something they feared or respected. Maybe it wasn't sacred. It was dangerous. And I crossed the line. The bleeding wall wasn't a mystery. It wasn't magic. I think it was a reaction, a chemical process, or some biological anomaly buried deep in the wall, in the stone, maybe in the paint. Something that responded to light, heat, or the presence of people. Maybe it had absorbed organic material for decades, blood, skin, sweat, and now expelled it every night. And maybe, by touching it, I became part of it. My body now mimics what I saw. Like my cells have been programmed to release blood the same way. There's no cut because there's no injury. It's just memory, biological memory. The villagers never stopped me, but they didn't warn me either. They must have known what would happen. That's why they kept their distance. That's why no one touched the wall. It wasn't worship, it was containment. Ritualized fear. Now I carry the wall with me. Not physically, but in function. I'm a leaking echo of that church. Every night I bleed, and I know it won't stop. There's no way to reverse it. No cure. I don't remember the actual moment of the crash. 1 second I was twisting along a narrow road in the hills, sharp bends and sudden drops on either side. And the next I was lying sideways in a ditch, my left arm pinned under something heavy, my ears full of rushing wind and a strange whistling sound I couldn't place. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't see much. There was blood in them, I think, or maybe it was dirt. I blinked until things came into focus. Trees, broken glass, my rental car nose down in a small ravine. I didn't know how long I'd been there, but the engine was cold. No sign of other cars. My phone had no service. I tried to move, and sharp pain shot through my ribs. I leaned back against the slope, breathing carefully, trying not to throw up. The world spun a bit. I didn't shout. I didn't see the point. No one would hear me out here. After a while, an hour, maybe more, I saw movement. 3 men coming down the hill. I thought I was hallucinating, but they reached me and pulled me out. I didn't say much, just pointed at my arm and chest. One of them gave me water. Another made a sort of sling from his jacket. They were calm, practiced, like this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. They didn't speak much, and I didn't try. My mind was foggy, and I was still shaken. They took me along a narrow path through the trees. I thought they were taking me to a clinic or maybe calling for help, but after maybe 20 minutes of slow walking, I started to notice things. A wooden sign with carved letters that had the name of the village. But the name was familiar. Not familiar like I'd seen it in a guidebook. Familiar like home. My hometown. I grew up in a small town 3 hours from the coast. A place where the same families had lived for generations. Where you could walk to the grocer, the post office, the single diner on the corner. The name on that sign was the name of my hometown. I assumed it was a coincidence, or that I was still confused. Concussed, maybe. I followed them into the village, expecting unfamiliar houses, a style that matched the region I'd been traveling through. Sloped roofs, stone walls, painted shutters. That's what the area was known for. But the houses were wooden. They had white siding and square windows. One had a red front door with peeling paint. Another had a tire swing hanging from a tree. There was a white mailbox shaped like a barn. I stared at that mailbox for a long time. It was the same mailbox my neighbor had back home. I said nothing. I followed them as they led me through a street that looked almost exactly like the one I'd grown up on. The road curved slightly at the same angle. The power lines buzzed in the same soft way they always had during hot afternoons. One of the street lamps had rust on its base, in a sharp V shape like someone had spilled something down it. I used to touch that same rust pattern every time I passed it as a kid. I started to feel cold. My skin, even under the sun, prickled. I thought again that maybe I was hallucinating, that I'd hit my head hard enough to start seeing things. Maybe my brain was replaying old memories, or maybe this was a dream. But the pain in my ribs was real. So was the heat on my skin, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the smell of dust and pine trees and engine oil. I couldn't shake any of it off. This was a dream. It led me to a house that looked exactly like the one I'd grown up in. It had the same cracked front step, the same tilt in the roof line, the same bent gutter that dripped loudly during storms. I touched the door frame. Same dent in the wood. Same squeaky hinge when they opened it. Inside, it was cooler, quiet. The men motioned for me to sit on the couch. Same plaid couch my parents had when I was little. A thick cushion sag in the same place where my dad always used to sit. They gave me water, something warm to eat, then left me alone. I lay there in silence, listening to the creaks in the ceiling. Even those sounded the same. I didn't sleep much that night. The house smelled like childhood. Old carpets, dust in the corners, a faint hint of laundry detergent I hadn't smelled in years. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the edges of tables, brushing my fingers along walls. Everything was identical. The wallpaper in the bathroom had that same rip near the baseboard. The kitchen faucet leaked in the same slow rhythm. I opened drawers. Same utensils. Same mug with the faded lighthouse. Same chip plate I'd broken and tried to glue back together when I was 12. Everything matched. When morning came, I stepped outside. The air smelled sharp, a little cooler. The village was still, except for a few people walking quietly, purposefully. They didn't look at me. No one smiled, waved, or nodded. They just walked past like I wasn't there. I wandered the streets. Every corner, every bend, every little detail. It was all a mirror of home. But not the home I'd left recently. The home I'd known years ago, from when I was a teenager, maybe even younger. Back when things were simpler, quieter. Back before so many people had left. Before the new supermarket had come in. Before the roads were repaved. This was an older version of home. I found a small library. Same shape, same porch railing with a missing spindle. Inside, books were arranged in the same order I remembered. Even the handwriting on the spine labels was the same. There was a small logbook at the front desk. I opened it. The names inside, I recognized them all. People I'd grown up with, neighbors, classmates. Some had died years ago. Others had moved away long before I left. But the names were there, freshly written in neat rows, like they just checked out books the day before. I walked back slowly, trying not to panic. My ribs hurt with each step. I told myself I was imagining things, that the similarities were playing tricks on me, that this was all some elaborate coincidence. But the deeper I went into the village, the more I saw. A bike leaning against a tree. My old bike. Same bent wheel. Same sticker on the seat post. A wooden sign with my father's name on it nailed above a shed. A small stone in a garden with my childhood dog's name carved into it. I felt sick. I tried asking questions, but no one spoke to me. They understood what I meant when I pointed or made gestures. They brought me food, bandaged my arm, but they didn't speak. No expressions, just polite silence. After a while, I stopped trying. I stayed in the house for 3 days, or maybe 4. I lost track. No clocks anywhere. My phone still had no service. I didn't see any vehicles. No TVs, no radios. Just people walking, tending gardens, cleaning their porches. I watched them from the window. One woman had the same walk as my 3rd grade teacher. She looked the same too. Same gray bun, same blue skirt. She carried a basket of laundry and hung it on a line that looked exactly like the one we used to have behind our house. I remember that skirt because she wore it every Tuesday. She had once scolded me for chewing gum in class. I hadn't thought of her in years. The question that kept circling in my head was why? Why would someone go to this much trouble to recreate a village? Why copy my hometown? How do they know the layout? The names? The rust on the lamppost? The dent in the doorframe? On the 5th day, maybe 6th, I decided to leave. I gathered my things, packed what little I had into a cloth bag someone had left me, and walked toward the path I thought we'd entered on. But the forest was thick, paths twisted and looped. After an hour of walking, I ended up back at the village edge. I tried again in a different direction. Same result. I stopped when the villagers pointed at the trees, made a walking motion. He simply shook his head. Later that night, I waited until it was dark and slipped out again. No one followed me. I walked for what felt like hours, stumbling over roots, tripping on stones, my side aching worse with every step. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No wind. No animals. No distant cars. I finally reached a clearing. A chain-link fence stood at the edge. I hadn't seen it before. It was tall, topped with coils of barbed wire. I ran my hand along it. Cold metal. Real. Past the fence was just more forest. A wide stretch of cleared ground, like a fire break, and then trees again. I followed the fence for a while. Eventually I found a gate. It was locked tight with a thick padlock. A sign hung beside it. No markings. No explanation. Just one word in red block letters. Research. I stared at that word until my eyes blurred. Then I turned and walked back. Inside the house, I sat on the floor. My chest hurt. My legs were scraped raw. I was covered in dust, dirt, pine needles. I thought about the word. Research. A replica. A test. That was it. It wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. I wasn't the subject. I was the variable. They'd built this place for some kind of psychological study. A perfect, functional replica of town, my memories. Somehow, they'd gather the data. Old photos, records, satellite images, maybe even direct observation. Then they waited, and when the opportunity came, an injured tourist near the edge of their boundary, they brought me in. Not to help, not to heal, but to watch. Maybe they wanted to see how I reacted, to see how long it would take me to notice, to study my movements, my patterns, my stress response, my memory. Maybe they'd done this with others before me. Maybe there were other villages, other replicas. I wasn't planning to stop at the village. In fact, I hadn't even known it was there. I was 4 days into a solo hike through a remote mountain region, somewhere in the lower Alps. The trail I was on wasn't on most maps, just an old forest path I'd read about in a forum for long-distance hikers who preferred unmarked routes. That's the kind of thing I liked. No noise, no cars, no people. Just me, my backpack, and miles of trail. It had rained the night before. Not a heavy downpour, just enough to soak the leaves and turn the dirt path into a slick mess. By midday, My boots were caked in mud and my socks were damp. I'd passed a fork in the trail around noon and had taken a left, mostly out of curiosity. That path wasn't marked at all, but it looked like it might lead somewhere, and I figured if it didn't, I'd just turn around. I had food and gear for several more days. The path narrowed, overgrown in parts, with saplings and brambles clawing at my legs. After about an hour of walking, I saw rooftops through the trees. First just one or two, then a whole cluster. That was strange. There was no mention of any village in this area. No signs, no road markings, nothing. I moved slowly through the trees until I hit a clearing and saw the full place. It was a small village, maybe 25 houses in all of them the same style, stone walls, pitched roofs with old, moss-covered tiles, and narrow chimneys. The buildings were laid out in no particular order, just scattered around a wide central space that might have once been a square. There were no cars, no wires, no satellite dishes, nothing modern. It was dead silent. I stood at the edge of the tree line for a long minute, just listening. No bird song, no wind through the leaves, no barking dogs, no voices, just the sound of my own breath. I stepped out of the forest and walked toward the village, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked abandoned, but not ruined. Everything was intact. The houses weren't falling apart. There were no broken windows, no signs of fire or rot. They looked locked. Every single house had its door shut tight. Every window was either shuttered or curtained from the inside. No signs of life. No smoke from chimneys. But no decay either. I checked the first door. Locked. So was the second. I went around trying a dozen more. All locked. The handles were cold metal, rusted in places but firm. I walked around the back of one house. The yard was small, with an old garden bed and a rusted watering can. Nothing growing. The back door also locked. I called out just once. Not loudly, just a cautious hello. Out of instinct. No answer. I felt dumb right after. I don't like drawing attention in strange places. By late afternoon, the sun was dipping behind the mountains and the shadows were getting long. I didn't want to camp in the forest again. The last night had been rough. Wind had kicked up and some animal had been circling my tent. I hadn't seen it, just heard the leaves crunching and twigs snapping. I decided I'd break into one of the houses. It felt wrong, but I told myself it was survival, not theft. I wasn't going to steal anything, just sleep. I found a house near the edge of the village with a cracked window on the side. Not shattered, just cracked at the edge where a nail had split the wood frame. With a little pressure from my multi-tool, I managed to wedge it open. It made a loud creaking sound, but nothing else happened. I climbed in and found myself in the kitchen. The air was dry, faintly musty, like no one had opened a door in years. There were dishes in the sink, old ceramic ones, hand-painted. Dust covered everything, but not thick, just enough to dull the shine. I moved slowly through the house. It was a single floor, 2 bedrooms, a living room, and kitchen. Everything was neat, a little too neat. There were no personal items, no photographs, no clothes in the closets, no papers or books, just the furniture. The beds were made. The cupboards were stocked with empty jars and folded dish towels. I opened a drawer. Inside, matches, a pen, some string. All very basic, very intentional. I chose the back bedroom and rolled out my sleeping pad. The bed looked clean, but I didn't trust the mattress. I ate some dried meat and bread from my pack, drank the last of my water, then lay back. I didn't sleep well. The silence was too deep. I kept hearing faint creaks like the settling of wood, but sharper. Once I thought I heard footsteps outside the window, but when I sat up and looked, there was nothing. No light, no movement. Eventually, I slept. When I woke, it was early. Pale morning light filtered through the window. I sat up slowly, bones stiff from the cold. I was reaching for my pack when I froze. The bedroom door was open. I had shut it the night before. Not locked, but closed. I was sure of that. Now it was wide open, and I could see straight into the hall. I stood up and stepped out, and I stopped dead. Every door in the house was open. The front door, the back door, the cabinets, the wardrobes, even the drawers in the kitchen. Every one of them was open. That was when I noticed something else. There was a coat on the hook by the front door. A long brown coat, thick wool, the kind someone might wear in winter. It hadn't been there the night before. I would have seen it when I first came in. I would have noticed it. I was sure of that. I walked to the coat and touched it. It was dry. It felt warm, faintly, like someone had wore it recently. I backed away and turned in a slow circle. Everything was open. Nothing else seemed moved. My pack was still by the bed. My boots were where I'd left them, but that coat hadn't been there. And someone had opened every door and drawer while I slept. I grabbed my things and left the house. Outside, it was worse. Every single door in the village was open. Not just unlocked, wide open. Front doors swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Shutters pulled back. Windows open. I could see into houses I hadn't entered. Chairs at tables. Beds made. Some had firewood stacked neatly. One house had a single shoe on the porch. But no people. Not a soul. I stood there, heart racing, and turned slowly in a full circle. Nothing moved. No sound. No animals. Just those open doors like the village had yawned wide while I was asleep. I needed to leave. I turned and headed for the path I'd come in on. I walked fast, almost jogging, my breath rising in clouds. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. The path was harder to follow in reverse, but I remembered the turns. I kept going until my legs burned and my throat felt raw from breathing in the cold air. By noon, I was far enough that the trees were thicker again and the village was out of sight. I finally stopped and sat on a flat rock. I pulled out a protein bar, chewed it without tasting it. Then I realized something that made my stomach turn. I hadn't seen any wildlife since I left the village. No birds, no squiddids, no deer, not even insects, just trees and wind. I kept going until nightfall. I didn't set up my tent. I found a shallow cave in a rock face and huddled inside, wrapped in my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me twitch. The crack of a branch, the rustle of dry leaves. I felt watched. For the next 2 days, I hiked without stopping. I filtered water from a stream, ate while walking. Eventually, I found a proper trail with signage, then a gravel service road. By the third night, I reached a ranger outpost. I didn't tell them about the village. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to sound insane. Maybe I didn't want them to go looking. When I got home, I searched maps, tried to find that area again. I found the forest, found the general region, but there was no record of any village where I'd been. No old settlement, no ghost town, nothing. I did find one thing, though, a single reference buried in an archived hiking blog from 10 years ago. A short entry, found an empty village near the base of the northern ridge. Everything locked tight. Gave me a bad feeling. Didn't go in. That was it. No name. No coordinates. But someone else had seen it. I thought a lot about that morning. About those open doors. The coat. I think someone lives there. Or watches it. Maybe a caretaker. Maybe a group. I don't know. But I'm sure of this. They didn't want me there. And they let me know it. Every door open. A silent message. Next time, they might not be so polite. I first saw the village from the ridge. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already dropping behind the mountains, laying thick shadows across the narrow path. I had been walking for 2 days, trying to follow an old logging trail that barely showed on the maps. I wasn't even sure if I was still on it. My legs hurt, and my pack had begun to feel heavier than it should. I had enough food, but only just. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left the last town, some 25 miles behind me. I hadn't come out here for any big reason. I wasn't running from anything. I wasn't looking for something either. I just wanted to get away for a bit. I'd taken a few weeks off work, packed what I needed, and picked a region on the map that seemed remote. It wasn't even supposed to be this remote, but something had gone wrong with my GPS. The signal had disappeared the day before, and I hadn't seen another person or even a proper road since. When I saw the roofs through the trees, I felt a strange mix of relief and hesitation. Relief because I thought I might be close to getting help or at least directions. Hesitation because the place didn't look like anywhere I had expected to find. The houses were small, built close together, with thick stone walls and steep wooden roofs. No cars, no telephone wires. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, but that was it. No signs, no sound. The trees came right up to the edge of the buildings, as if the forest had swallowed most of it. I descended slowly, half expecting someone to call out to me or for a dog to bark. Nothing, just the wind in the trees and the crunch of my boots on the gravel road as I stepped into the village. The sun had almost gone behind the ridge, and the last light made the windows of the buildings look dark and thick, almost like black eyes. The first person I saw was an old man sitting on a wooden stool outside a house. He looked up at me as I passed. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, slowly, and looked away. I said hello, but my voice sounded loud and out of place. He didn't respond. He didn't even flinch, just kept staring at the trees. Further in, I saw more people. A woman carrying a basket. 2 children sitting near a small stream, watching leaves float past. A man cutting wood with a hand axe. They all saw me. They all nodded slightly, almost in sync, and then went back to what they were doing. No one spoke. It was unnerving at first. I tried saying a few words, asking if there was a shop or a place to stay, but the most I got was a gesture, a finger pointing to a nearby house, or a hand sweeping toward an empty bench. No sound, not even a cough. No greetings, no questions, just nods and gestures. I didn't know what else to do, so I stayed. That first night, I slept in a small room above an empty shop. It looked like it had once sold clothes. There were shelves, empty racks, a few pieces of cloth folded neatly in a basket, but there was no sign of recent business. The bed upstairs was made, clean, and comfortable. On the table was a plate with bread and a hard cheese. No note, no explanation. I hadn't seen anyone come in or out. I assumed someone had brought it while I was looking around. I ate, I washed my face in the basin, and I laid down. That night I had dreams. Strange, but not frightening. I dreamed I was walking in a fog, following shapes that looked like people, but they were always just a few steps ahead, turning corners before I could catch up. I woke up before sunrise, sweating, with the image of a hand beckoning me from behind a tree stuck in my mind. The days started to blend together. I told myself I'd stay just a night or two and then head back, find a better path out. But each morning I found something that made me stay. Sometimes it was the breakfast left quietly outside the door. Always simple food, but fresh. Sometimes it was the way the forest looked, thick with mist, but alive with birds and movement. Other times, I stayed simply because I couldn't decide what else to do. The people were quiet but not hostile. They would nod when I passed. Some offered small gestures, handing me a warm bowl of soup, pointing toward an old well when I looked thirsty. No words, just actions. Clear, deliberate, almost rehearsed. I began trying to talk to them less. At first, I made an effort, asking questions, using different phrases, repeating myself. Nothing worked. Their faces stayed calm, neutral, never annoyed, never smiling, just present. They used their hands more than I was used to, pointing, waving gently, tapping objects. Their communication was efficient, wordless, and strangely unified. They understood each other without confusion. A woman could glance at a man across the square and tap her bucket twice, and he would stand and walk to her. A boy could raise 2 fingers and point to the woods, and another would nod and follow. After a week, I found myself doing it too. Not speaking as much, watching more, picking up their rhythm. There was a routine to the village. People woke early. They worked, tending small gardens, chopping wood, carrying things. Meals seemed to happen at different times, in small groups, but no one ate alone unless they were visitors like me. Children were quiet, but not shy. They played in the dirt, climbed trees, built small things with sticks and stones. Everything was peaceful, too peaceful almost. I kept thinking, how is this place not on any maps? How do they live like this? There were no visible power lines, but some homes had small solar panels. There was no school that I could see, but the children often sat in small circles with older villagers who used sticks to draw shapes in the dirt. Teaching, maybe. No loud machines. No TV. No music. No radios. Just the sound of wind, water, footsteps, and the occasional bird call. One afternoon, I followed a trail past the village into the woods. I had seen others go that way, carrying baskets. I thought maybe it led to a field or another small outpost. After 20 minutes, I came to a clearing. There were rows of vegetables, a few goats, and 2 men working silently. They saw me, nodded, and went back to work. One of them pointed to a stump if I wanted to sit. I did. I watched them work for nearly an hour. No one spoke. They coordinated without sound, passing tools, moving in rhythm, harvesting in unison. It was efficient, smooth, and completely silent. As I walked back, I realized I hadn't spoken all day. Not a word. It hit me in a strange way. I stopped on the trail and tried saying something out loud. "Hello," I said to no one. The word came out dry and slow, like my mouth didn't know how to form it. I said it again, louder. It sounded weird, like I was forcing something that didn't belong. I felt foolish, like shouting in a church. When I returned to the village, no one looked concerned. A girl handed me a piece of fruit, nodded, and ran off. I nodded back. I didn't speak. Over the next days, the silence sank deeper into me. I started thinking in gestures. If I needed something, I pointed. If I was thankful, I placed my hand on my chest. If I saw someone coming, I stepped aside and nodded. I didn't speak, not because I couldn't, but because it didn't feel right anymore. It wasn't until the third week that I realized I hadn't heard my own voice in days. I was sitting near the stream, watching the water slide over the rocks when I tried again. I cleared my throat, opened my mouth, and tried to say my name. It didn't come out. My tongue fumbled. My throat tightened. I coughed, tried again, but the word felt wrong. I could think it clearly, my name, my memories, but when I tried to speak, it was like my mouth had forgotten order. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening. The village was still. A few owls called in the distance, but that was it. No conversations, no laughter, not even whispers. I began to worry, not just about forgetting how to speak, but about forgetting the urge to. My mind still worked. I could think, remember, understand. But the part of me that wanted to say things out loud was fading. And not just speech. I was starting to forget other things. The sound of my friends' voices, the feel of city streets, the way phones used to buzz in my pocket. They were still there, but dull, like memories from a dream. I decided to leave. Not just walk around, but actually go. I packed my things, left a small note behind, though I doubted anyone would read it, and headed north, toward where I thought the last town might be. No one stopped me. A few villagers watched from their doorways. One man raised a hand in farewell. No words, just the same quiet acceptance. I walked all day. The path narrowed, then broke into branches. I took the one that felt right. By nightfall, I hadn't found anything. No road, no trail markers, just trees and rocks and silence. I camped under a large pine tree. The air was cold. I tried to speak again, tried yelling, singing, anything. My voice cracked. A few sounds came out, ugly, hoarse, broken. Not words, not mine. The next morning, I turned back. I told myself I needed more supplies. I told myself I'd try again later. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. The silence was no longer strange. It was comfort, a kind of shared understanding that didn't need explanations or justifications. Weeks passed, or maybe months. Time moved differently. I found a letter under my front door on a Thursday morning. I had no idea how it got there. There was no stamp, no envelope, just a folded piece of thick paper with a short message typed neatly in the center. It said, "We look forward to welcoming you. The village is ready." There was no name, no date, no signature. Just those two sentences, and underneath, a place name I didn't recognize. Rookvale. I didn't know a Rookvale. I even looked it up online. Nothing came up. No mention of it in travel blogs. No map listings, nothing. The name sounded British, maybe even a bit Victorian. I lived alone in a rented flat near Leeds, just working odd jobs and temping here and there. My social life was thin. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't part of any clubs. I had no family left. I didn't know anyone who'd prank me like this either. But the letter stuck in my head. I thought about it all day, even took it to work. I showed it to a guy I sometimes shared a shift with, and he just shrugged and said it sounded like spam. Probably a cult thing, he said, half joking. But that didn't feel right. Cults ask for money. They want attention. This was different. It felt personal somehow. Like whoever wrote it already knew I'd read it carefully. Like they knew I wouldn't throw it away. By Sunday, I gave in. I had time. I had fuel. I had nothing tying me down that week. So I packed a bag, some food, a map, and set off in my car with a full tank. I didn't know where I was going. Rookvale wasn't on the map, but something about it stuck with me. I thought maybe it was an old name for a place that had changed. Or maybe it was deep in the countryside, too small to register. I drove south first, then west, relying mostly on back roads. I stopped in little villages, asking locals if they'd heard of Brookvale. No one had. I drove through miles of woodland, over one-lane bridges, past sheep-dotted fields. The sun dipped lower. I was going to give up and turn around when I saw a sign, hand-painted on old wood, nailed to a leaning post, Brookvale, 2 miles. It was real. That shocked me more than anything. The road narrowed, winding up a small hill into trees that arched overhead. The forest grew thicker. I slowed down. Then, just as the light started to go orange, I broke through the last trees, and there it was. The village sat in a shallow bowl of land, surrounded by low hills. Maybe 20 or 30 houses, all made of stone and timber, their roofs steep and dark. There were gardens, footpaths, an old church with no bell. I saw no cars, no telephone poles. The place looked preserved, not in a tourist way, but like it had never changed. Not once. I pulled my car into a flat space that looked like a communal square. No markings, no signs, just bare dirt and smooth stones. As soon as I stepped out, I felt something strange. Not a chill, more like the air was too still. There was no wind, no bird noise, just quiet. And then the people came out. From all sides, they emerged. Men, women, old, young, all in plain clothes, nothing odd or fancy. Some in boots, some in slippers. But all of them stopped and looked right at me. No one said anything, but the way they stood, calm, like they knew me, put me on edge. One older woman, hair white and pinned up, walked up close and nodded slowly. Not a greeting, more like confirmation. I nodded back, out of instinct. She stepped aside. They parted like a wave around me. It was eerie. No one smiled. No one looked confused or surprised. They all looked like they'd seen this before, like I was a delivery arriving on time. Some watched from windows. A few leaned on garden gates. All of them stared. I wanted to ask something, where I was, who they were, why they looked at me like that. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. The air felt thick in my throat. Instead, I just picked up my bag and walked further in, thinking someone would stop me. No one did. A young man broke from the group and walked ahead of me. He looked about 30, strong build, simple clothes. He didn't speak. He just led me along a narrow stone path toward a small house at the edge of the village. It was clean, with fresh curtains in the windows, a small vegetable patch out back, and a chair on the porch. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was stocked, clean linen, food in the pantry, even matches and candles by the table. Like someone had lived there yesterday. I stayed. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to write down my thoughts, but I couldn't focus. I watched the trees sway in the distance, even though I couldn't hear them. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I walked around the village. No one stopped me. Everyone nodded as I passed, some tipping their heads slightly. They all behaved the same, polite, passive, but not friendly. No one asked me who I was. No one treated me like a stranger. It was like they already knew everything. I tried to leave that afternoon. I got in my car and drove back the way I came. The forest path was there. I passed the Brookvale sign again. I turned back onto the main road. Relief settled in. But 10 minutes later, the road dipped, the trees opened, and I saw the village again. I slammed on the brakes. It was the same hill, the same wooden sign. I hadn't turned. I hadn't looped. But I was back. I tried another route, a side path that curved through some brush. It looked rough, but passable. I followed it for 20 minutes. It narrowed, then vanished. Trees closed in again. I turned around, and there was the sign again. Brookvale, 2 miles. I got out of the car and walked. I climbed a small hill to look around. I should have seen open land, roads, something, but all I saw was green. Forest in every direction, and Brookvale in the middle, like it had always been there. I gave up and went back. The villagers didn't react. No surprise, no concern. They just watched as I returned to the house. Over the next few days, I tried everything. GPS didn't work. No bars on my phone. I tried hiking out, carrying supplies. Every time, I'd end up back on the same path. Like the land bent around me. Not in a magic way, but like the trails were built to confuse. Like the woods had been planted that way on purpose. Food was restocked without me noticing. I'd go to bed with half a loaf, wake up with a full one. Same with water. My clothes were washed and folded when I left them out. Never saw who did it. I began to take notes, every turn, every path. I built a map. I watched the sun. I kept time. Nothing strange happened with the sky or light. But still, every effort to leave failed. I didn't lose time. I didn't hallucinate. I just couldn't get out. Then I started noticing the other things. At exactly 7 every morning, the church bell rang, even though there was no bell inside. At noon, everyone stopped what they were doing and stood still for 1 minute. At dusk, every house lit a single candle in the window, then snuffed it at the same moment. When I tried to avoid the routine, stay in bed, skip the candle, the villagers would stare. Not angry, just watchful, like they were waiting for me to fall in line. One day, I followed a group to a shed behind the church. They opened it, went inside, and I waited. 20 minutes later, they came out, each carrying tools, rakes, hammers, spades. They handed one to me. I took it without speaking. We worked together repairing a fence I hadn't seen before. When it was done, we left. It became a rhythm. I was drawn into their routines. Wake, eat, work, rest. No noise, no fights, no change. And then, after weeks, maybe months, something clicked. One night, I sat alone outside, watching the candles go out across the village. A slow realization settled in. This place wasn't holding me. It was absorbing me. There were no leaders, no decisions. Just patterns. Repeated behavior. Everyone had a role. Everyone followed. I hadn't been trapped here. I had been expected. I thought back to the letter. We look forward to welcoming you. Not visit. Not stop by. Just welcoming. Like it was permanent. I searched the village records. Found a room beneath the church, stacked with ledgers, names, lists. Each decade had a list of arrivals. All handwritten. One name added every few years. Some names had lines drawn through them. Some stayed, some didn't. I found my name on the most recent page. Written weeks before I'd ever come. There was no mystery left. Someone had tracked me, chosen me, and sent the letter at the right moment. Not randomly. I had no attachments. No one would report me missing. No one would chase. I was a perfect fit. One night, I climbed the hill again and stared out. No fences, no videos, just trees and paths, folding inward like a maze built not with walls, but expectation. I understood it now. Brookvale wasn't a trap. It was a system, a village that maintained itself by bringing in people like me. Loners, drifters, people no one would look for. And once you arrived, the rhythm wore you down. No force, just quiet pressure, days that blurred, tasks that filled your time, eyes that watched until you gave in. I stayed. I became one of them. I lit the candle. I ate the bread. I stood still at noon. The house was always stocked. The water always clean. I had clothes, a place, a role. There was no punishment, no threats, just a quiet life. I was walking along the edge of a wide valley when I lost the trail. My map didn't help. Everything looked the same out here. The hills were low and dry, the trees too far apart to offer real shade, and my water was almost gone. I wasn't scared at first. I had a compass, a full backpack, and enough experience to know that panicking would only make things worse. But after 3 hours of walking and finding myself circling the same ridge, I started to worry. I climbed to the top of a bare hill, trying to get my bearings, and that's when I saw it. A small village tucked between 2 hills. It didn't look like much. A few houses, maybe 10 or 12, some gardens, a dirt road that disappeared into the trees. No cars, no people in sight, but smoke rose from one chimney, and that was enough for me. By the time I reached it, the sun was setting. The path into the village was narrow and uneven. The houses were made of stone and wood, small but neat. The gardens were well kept. I passed a well near the center of the village and saw stacked firewood, chickens in coops, tools leaning against walls. It looked real, lived in. I called out, but no one answered. I didn't want to barge into someone's home, so I picked a spot near the well and set up my tent. I figured I'd explain myself when someone came out, but no one did. I boiled the last of my water, ate some crackers, and went to bed. The night was quiet. No wind, no insects. I thought I heard footsteps once, but when I unzipped the tent, there was nothing outside. When I woke up, the sun was already up. I climbed out of the tent, stretched, and looked around. Nothing seemed different. My gear was still there. The same smoke rose from the same chimney. I packed up and walked toward the nearest house. Before I could knock, the door opened. A man stepped out, wearing simple clothes, holding a bundle of firewood. He glanced at me, gave a small nod, and walked past without a word. It felt strange, but I didn't push it. Maybe this place didn't get many visitors. Maybe they were private people. I didn't need anything more than directions. I wandered around the village, trying to find someone who'd speak. A woman was hanging laundry behind one house. An older man was trimming a hedge with shears. A child was chasing a dog. No one said anything, but they all looked at me. No smiles, no fronts. Just glances, and then back to whatever they were doing. It took an hour to realize I'd seen everything there was to see. There was no store, no signs, no visible road in or out. I followed the path I came in on, thinking I'd head back the way I came. Maybe I could retrace my steps, find a trail. But after a few miles, the path just ended. Trees and grass. No trail markers, no worn ground. I checked my compass and tried new direction, but the trees thickened and the ground turned soft and uneven. I kept going until the light began to fade, then turned back. When I got back to the village, it was like I had never left. The smoke from the chimney was the same. The woman still hung laundry, even though I'd seen her do that 5 hours ago. The child chased the same dog. The man was still trimming the same hedge. It was like nothing had changed. I set up my tent again, ate the last of my food, and fell asleep uneasy. The next morning, I woke to the same sunlight, the same stillness. I stepped out of the tent and froze. The well was full again. My water bottles, which I'd emptied, were sitting full beside it. The same man stepped out of the same house with the same firewood. Walked past me again. The same woman hung the same clothes. The same child chased the same dog. It wasn't just a quiet village. It was the same day. I checked my watch. The date hadn't changed. I checked my phone. No signal. I checked the food wrappers from the night before, still in the trash pouch. So I had lived yesterday. I remembered it, but no one else did. I left again, early this time. I didn't follow the path. I struck out in a straight line, climbing hills and pushing through brambles. I moved fast, not pacing myself, just trying to get away. But 5 hours later, I stumbled out of the woods and onto the same narrow path. The village ahead, smoke from the chimney, same man walking with firewood. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up with my flashlight, watching. I saw lights go out in houses one by one. I heard a door creak open and close. Footsteps in the dirt. A chicken clucking. Normal things. Nothing out of place. And when I finally dozed off, the sun was just starting to rise. And then I woke up again. Same sun. Same morning. Bottles full again. Tent packed tight and dry. My boots clean. The same man. The same woman. The same child. I tried everything. I counted steps between buildings. I buried things. I carved into tree trunks. I smashed a window. The next day, everything was as it was. The tree trunks were whole. The glass repaired. My carved initials gone. I tried talking to someone once. Stood in front of the man with the firewood and shouted. He paused, looked at me, then walked past again. No recognition. No confusion. It was like I was part of the background to them. Just another object. One day, date 17, maybe 18, I stayed in bed. Didn't leave the tent. Waited to see if someone would come. No one did. I slept through most of the day, then the night. Woke up again. Same day. I broke into a house once. Just opened the door and went in. Inside, everything was neat, old-fashioned. No electronics, no clocks. A kettle on the stove. Jars of dried food. A coat on a hook. I opened drawers, touched everything, left things in piles. The next morning, it was all back in place. My footprints gone. Dust undisturbed. The weird thing was, I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel hungry anymore either. I stopped needing water, or sleep, or warmth. I still ate because I felt like I should, but I wasn't sure I needed to. I started mapping the village. Every house, every garden. I made a chart of events. Times when people stepped out, when birds landed on fences, when the sun hit the well. Everything repeated perfectly. I set up cameras, but they always showed the same day, then reset. Even my notes vanished if I left them outside the tent. I kept track in my head instead. The village had 12 houses, one well for chickens, one dog, 13 people, two women in the east house, a man and woman in the far corner, the boy and the dog by the shed, the old man with the shears. I gave them names in my mind: red shirt, hat woman, trimmer, dog boy. I could guess what they'd do, where they'd go. Every day the same. I tried burning a house once, piled drywood around it, lit it with a spark from my camp stove, watched it burn half down. The smoke was thick and black. No one came out. No one tried to stop it. I stood there, choking in the smoke, watching the roof collapse. When I woke up the next day, the house stood again, perfect and clean. The man stepped out, carrying firewood. I stopped trying to leave. I stopped trying to change things. I just watched, waited, tracked the patterns. I wondered if maybe this was just how things were now. Maybe I'd hit my head. Maybe I was in a coma somewhere. But I could feel. I could think. I tried not sleeping. Stayed up 3 nights in a row. Didn't matter. The moment I lost focus, the moment I blinked too long, back to morning. The sun in the same place. My pack packed. My boots clean. I started writing in tiny letters on the inside of my boots. Day 42. Still here. But by nightfall, even that faded. I couldn't keep anything from one day to the next, except memories. Eventually, I stopped trying to count. Time was useless. My beard grew, but then it didn't. My nails lengthened, then reset. Once I cut myself on a nail. A deep gash. Bled a lot. I bandaged it, went to bed. Next morning, clean skin. One day, I climbed the tallest hill near the village. I stood on top, looked down at the tiny rooftops. Smoke from the chimney. Same as always. But then I saw something new. A glint in the trees. Metal. Maybe I hiked toward it. Took hours. It was a small weather station. Solar panels. A rusted sign. Something about environmental research. I kicked around in the brush and found a broken camera, some wire, a half-buried cable running down into the dirt. I dug where the cable led. Used my camp shovel. After an hour, I found concrete. A flat square slab with a rusted hatch. I pulled, and it opened with a scream of hinges. A metal ladder led down. I hesitated, then climbed. It wasn't deep. 10, maybe 12 feet. A single room. Concrete walls. A desk, shelves with old files. A dusty monitor. A generator in the corner. I tried the switch. Nothing. Dead. But the files were dry, still readable. Reports. Pages about environmental readings, time markers, radiation levels. I read them all, sitting on the floor. The last entry was strange. Field 12 shows perfect loop stability. Subject placement complete. Observation ongoing. No outside interference recorded. There were no names. No dates. Just numbers, readings, charts. But I kept reading. More pages. Words like loop test zone, memory anchoring, cognitive retention. Then I found a map. A simple drawing. It showed the village, the hills. I've been driving for nearly 5 hours without stopping when I saw the village sign. The name was painted in faded white on a crooked wooden board. I couldn't pronounce it. It looked like it belonged to an old dialect or some local form of spelling. But I slowed down anyway. I hadn't seen another car for maybe 40 minutes. No stops, no fuel stations. I was low on gas and needed a place to rest. This was the first sign of life I'd come across since the last town. The road narrowed as I entered. Trees hung low on both sides, forming a tunnel of leaves. The sun filtered through in patches. Everything was quiet. I rolled down the window and listened. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just the gentle hum of the engine. When I passed the first house, I noticed something odd. The windows weren't broken, but each one had a thick curtain drawn tightly across it, even in broad daylight. Another house came up, same thing. Then another, with boards nailed across the windows from the inside. I pulled the car over and got out. My legs ached, and I needed a stretch. The village looked old, but well kept. The houses were wooden and close together. The road was a patchwork of stones and dirt, with grass growing through the cracks. There were no shops visible, but I noticed signs of life. Clothes drying on lines, smoke from chimneys, the faint smell of food cooking. People lived here, but I didn't see anyone at first. As I walked further in, I saw movement through a cracked doorway. A man glanced out, then quickly pulled the door shut. A little further along, a woman watering plants looked up, saw me, and went back inside without a word. I wasn't looking for trouble, just food, fuel if they had any, maybe a place to sleep for a few hours. At the village square, I found a stone well, a few benches, and a notice board with yellowed paper pinned to it. The writing was in a language I couldn't read. I stood there for a while, hoping someone would come out and speak to me, but no one did. What struck me most was the lack of glass. None of the windows reflected light. Most were covered. I realized I hadn't seen a single mirror, piece of shiny metal, or anything with a reflection. Even the well had a wooden cover sealed tightly over it. I took out my phone to check my location, but I had no signal. I looked at myself in the black screen just to check how tired I looked and noticed it in the darkened reflection just over my right shoulder. There was a shape. Something tall. A head, shoulders, long neck maybe. Not a person I recognized. I spun around, nothing there. Just the empty square behind me and my car down the road. It shook me a little, but I chalked it up to tiredness. My eyes were probably playing tricks on me. Still, I turned off the phone screen and stuffed it into my pocket. The moment I did, I heard a door creak open. A group of people was standing at the edge of the square now. About 10 of them, men and women of different ages, all wearing plain clothes. Long sleeves, high collars, dull colors. They stared at me, saying nothing. I raised my hand in a wave. They didn't respond. I was about to approach when one of them, a middle-aged woman, pointed at my backpack. I thought maybe she was asking what was in it. I unzipped it slowly, showing them the contents. Some snacks, a water bottle, a book, and my travel mirror. I always carried one when I hiked, just a small one, palm size in a hard case. The moment I took it out to show it was harmless, the reaction was instant. All 10 people gasped. One of them screamed like an actual high-pitched, terrified scream, and they scattered. Some ran behind buildings, others bolted down side streets. The square was empty again within seconds. I stood there, stunned, holding the closed mirror in my hand. I hadn't even opened it. My first thought was, are they scared of mirrors? Is it religious? Cultural? Superstition? I slipped the mirror back into my bag and took a few steps toward the nearest house. The door had been left ajar in the panic. I didn't want to invade anyone's space, but I knocked gently on the frame. No answer, just silence again. I decided to keep walking. Maybe I'd find someone less frightened, or someone who could explain. Further along, the houses got older. Cracks in the walls, moss on the roofs. I passed a shed with the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, I saw broken glass piled in one corner. Thick cloth hung over every surface. A large metal pot sat upside down on the ground, dented and rusted. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide every possible reflection. I walked in and looked closer. The glass was from mirrors, framed shards, some still with ornate edges. Some even had tape wrapped around them. I picked up a piece and tilted it, curious. There was again, that same tall figure. This time I saw more. The shoulders were unnaturally broad. The face was long, pale, with a stretched grin that didn't look quite human. No hair, just a smooth head, eyes like holes. It stood inches behind me. I dropped the glass. It shattered into smaller pieces, and I jumped back. I turned, heart pounding. No one. The shed was empty. The road outside was still. The air was dry and warm. But I'd seen it. I'd seen it twice now. Not just a trick of light. Not just my tired brain. Something was behind me, but only in reflections. I ran out of the shed and back to my car. I got in and locked the doors. I breathed for a minute, then started the engine. I wasn't going to stay here. I didn't care if I had to drive on fumes. I'd find the next town. But when I turned the key, the engine sputtered once, twice, then died. No power. The dash lights blinked out. I swore into my breath and hit the wheel. I didn't have tools to check the engine myself, and there was no one left outside to ask. I tried the phone again. Still no signal. The map app just spun. I tried restarting the phone. Nothing changed. The sun was starting to drop now. Long shadows stretched over the road. I had a decision to make. Stay in the car overnight or try to find help before it got dark. Reluctantly, I got out again and slung my backpack over my shoulder. I kept the mirror in the bottom, zipped up tight. I didn't want another reaction like before. I followed the main road deeper into the village. The houses grew farther apart. and the trees thicker. Eventually, I came to what looked like a community hall or old schoolhouse. A wide building with a flat roof and boarded windows. The door wasn't locked, just wedged shut with a stone. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was cooler. Dust hung in beams of light coming through small cracks. I used a flashlight on my phone, careful not to shine it too wildly. There were chairs stacked in corners, faded posters on the walls, some with children's handwriting, others with strange symbols I couldn't read. But what caught my eye was the far end of the room. A mirror, large, maybe 5 feet tall. It leaned against the wall, mostly covered by a thick tarp. The edge of the glass peeked out underneath. The only intact mirror I'd seen in the whole village. I approached slowly, heart racing. I don't know what I expected. Maybe confirmation I'd imagined it all. I lifted the tarp just a little. I saw myself. And behind me, closer than before. It wasn't just standing anymore. It was reaching. The hand, long fingers, bony, pale skin stretched tight over the knuckles, hovered just behind my head. The grin was wider. Too wide. The thing wasn't mimicking me. It wasn't me. It was independent, real, and it was watching me through the mirror. I backed away, letting the tarp fall. I stumbled over a chair and hit the ground hard. My flashlight rolled away, casting wild shadows across the walls. When I scrambled up and looked back at the mirror, the tarp had settled. Nothing moved. I didn't look again. I ran from the building. As I burst into the open air, I saw villagers lining the streets again. They stood silently, watching me. I realized I must have wandered into something I was never meant to see. And then it clicked. It wasn't superstition. It was a myth. They weren't afraid of mirrors because of stories or religion. They were hiding something real, something that existed only in reflections. Maybe a hallucination, maybe a psychological condition passed through isolation, shared by the entire village. Or maybe it was some trick of the light. Something to do with angles, light pollution, chemicals in the air, or water. Something I didn't understand. But whatever it was, they lived with it, and they learned to never reflect it, to never see it. I left the village at sunrise, walked for hours, until I reached a gas station at the edge of a highway. I flagged down a passing truck and left my car behind. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I had my blood tested, my eyes checked, even went to a neurologist months later. No issues. Perfect health. But I can't look in mirrors now. Not comfortably. Not for long. Because sometimes, just sometimes, I catch something in the corner of my eye. A shadow, a shape, a grin. And I know, deep down, that it followed me out. I've been walking for 3 days when I found a village. I'd taken a hiking trail that I thought would loop back toward the main road, but I must have missed a turn or followed the wrong fork. My phone had died the first evening, and my power bank was already drained from a long trip. I didn't panic at first. I had a water bottle, some dried fruit, a granola bar. But by the third morning, my head was spinning from hunger and thirst, and my legs felt like lead. I hadn't seen another person in over 36 hours. So when I stepped out of the trees and into that village, it felt like something close to a miracle. There was no sign marking its name, no parked cars, no power lines. Just a tight cluster of low stone buildings and a central square paved with flat, pale stones that reflected the late afternoon sun. What caught my eye first was the food. There were 2 long wooden tables placed in the center of the square, laid out with rows of plates, bowls, baskets, and trays. Bread still steaming at the center. Roasted meats, chicken, beef, something darker and glistening with juices. Potatoes, root vegetables, boiled eggs. A tureen full of some kind of stew, with a ladle resting just so on the rim. There were bottles of water, pitchers of wine, and even silver cutlery placed neatly beside each setting. No one was there. I stood still for a full minute. It wasn't just quiet, it was silent. The only sound was the breeze shifting the cloth over the tables. The houses around the square all had their doors shut, shutters drawn. No birdsong, no dogs barking, no footsteps, just the food. I walked closer. The smell was intoxicating. Rich, savory, full of spice and smoke. My stomach turned inside out. I don't know if it was the hunger or the heat, but I could feel sweat running down my spine, and the light around the edges of my vision started to fade. I waited. I stood there hoping someone would come out, maybe wave at me, welcome me, offer a plate. But nothing happened. After 5 minutes, maybe 10, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached forward and took a small roll of bread from one of the baskets. Still warm. I pulled it apart and stuffed the pieces into my mouth, chewing fast. No alarm sounded. No one came running out. The silence stayed. That was all I needed. I sat at the table and ate like an animal. Chicken thigh, thick with crisp skin and seasoning. Boiled potatoes. A wedge of what tasted like sheep's cheese. I drank a whole glass of water and poured myself another. I took a slice of meat from a plate further down, dark red inside, roasted perfectly. I didn't stop to wonder what it was. I must have eaten for 20 minutes straight. I didn't touch the wine. Some part of me was still alert enough to know I need a clear head if I had to keep moving. But everything else, I tore through it like I hadn't eaten in days, which I hadn't. When I finally leaned back, stuffed and lightheaded, the sun was already lower in the sky. The edges of the stone square glowed orange. I thought I should knock on one of the doors, maybe thank someone, ask where I was if there was a phone. But the heaviness in my stomach slowed me down. I thought I'd just rest for a minute. I lay down on the stone bench along the side of the square. Closed my eyes. The stone was warm under my back. I meant to rest only for a few moments, just until the nausea passed. When I opened my eyes, it was pitch black. No stars, no moon. Just complete dark. I couldn't even see the outline of my hands. I sat up, heart racing. I could feel something sticky on my skin, sweat, or maybe something spilled on me during the meal. I rubbed at my shirt, and my hands came away wet. There was a low humming in my ears. No, not in my ears. In the ground. I stood slowly. My stomach turned again. I wanted to throw up, but nothing came out. I took a step forward, and my foot landed on something soft. Cloth maybe. I reached down. Bread. Cold now. I fumbled forward, hands stretched out, trying to feel my way toward one of the houses. That's when I felt something strike the side of my neck. Not hard. A prick. Like an insect bite. I slapped my neck. My fingers brushed something metallic before I dropped to the ground. Everything went sideways. The world tilted. My hands hit stone. I felt myself being pulled. I don't remember the next part clearly. It was like falling into sleep while knowing you shouldn't. I was aware but not awake. My arms were moved. My shirt lifted. My pants taken off. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Just lay there, floating in the dark, while hands moved over me, turning me, lifting me, measuring me. When I came to, I was gagged. Not with a cloth, but something thicker, rubber maybe, strapped behind my head. My wrists were tied. Ankles too. Something soft under my back. A mattress? It was dark, but not pitch black anymore. There was a slit of light coming through the top of the room. A single vent. The walls were stone. Cold and damp. Cellar. I was in a cellar. I started to thrash. Kick my legs. My ankles only had about 3 inches of give. The ties didn't budge. I screamed into the gag. It came out as a low, wet grunt. I waited. Listened. Nothing. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate from above. Floorboards creaked. I froze. A metal door opened. A rectangle of light cutting into the room. A figure stepped inside. No mask, no cloak. Just a man. Older. Wearing a dark apron. His face was blank. He didn't look at me for long. He knelt beside me and touched my arm. Turned it gently. Then let it fall back. He checked my thigh the same way. Pressed a finger into my flesh. Nodded. He left without a sound. The door shut. I screamed again. My throat burned. I kicked until my heel scraped raw against the wood at the foot of the cot. I bucked my hips, tried to roll off the side. Couldn't move far enough. That night, I stayed awake the entire time. The air grew colder. My nose dripped. My limbs went numb. I heard things. Other steps. Soft thuds. Water trickling. A door opening and closing again. And then, a few hours before dawn, I heard something else. A wheel cart, squeaking softly. Rubber on wood. It stopped outside the door. When it opened, there were 2 people this time. One was the man I'd seen earlier. The other was younger. She was carrying a clipboard and writing something. They both came forward. The man untied my ankle ropes first. I tried to kick, but he dodged easily. He tied them together with a different rope, longer this time, then looped it around my arms and back. The woman pushed the cart forward. It had restraints bolted into the surface. They didn't speak, didn't pause. Together, they lifted me onto it. My stomach pressed into the cold metal tray. Leather straps went over my back and thighs. I started sobbing. They wheeled me down a corridor. The floor changed from wood to tile. The smell changed too. Bleach, steel, and underneath it, cooked meat. The room they rolled me in looked like a butcher's kitchen. There were sinks, knives on magnetic racks, a long counter against one wall, a hose coil beside a drain, and a set of scales. The man started sharpening a knife. The woman approached with a syringe. I tried to roll, scream, do anything. I couldn't. She stuck the needle into my thigh and pressed. That was when I blacked out again. I don't know how long I was gone. When I came to, I was lying on a different surface, still metal but flatter. No straps. My arms and legs weren't tied anymore. My mouth wasn't gagged. I blinked. It was a blanket over me. Thin, itchy. My body felt like it had been on fire and then doused in ice. I sat up. I was alone. No tools, no figures. Just a narrow room with tiled walls and a drain in the center of the floor. I tried the door. It opened. No. I staggered out. Hallway. No signs. I walked left, hand on the wall. Past a room with open trays. Raw meat laid out on cold steel. Another with racks of ribs, something like ribs. Turned a corner. Found stairs. Took them two at a time, stumbling. Pushed through a door at the top. Back in the square. Daylight. The feast tables were gone. Not just the food. Everything. Tables, chairs, pitchers vanished. As if they'd never been there. I ran. Down the nearest alley. Past silent buildings. No faces in the windows. No curtains moved. I kept running. Out of the village. Through the brush. I tripped, got up, kept moving. For hours. Eventually, I found a road. A dirt path. Barely wide enough for a car. I followed it for another 6 hours before I saw someone. A farmer in an old truck. He didn't ask questions. Just drove me to the nearest town. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Just that I got lost, found a village, passed out. They assumed dehydration, maybe heat stroke. But I know what I saw, what I tasted, what they were preparing. I lost 30 pounds in the weeks after. Couldn't eat. Every time I smelled cooked meat, my stomach turned. I looked for that village later. Checked satellite maps, forums, old directories. Nothing. It's not on any record. But I remember. Everybody. They fed me, so I'd feed them. And I don't know how many others they've done the same to. I had been driving for almost 12 hours straight. It started out as a simple plan. Take a week off work, get in the car, and drive north. I didn't have a destination. I only wanted silence. Air that didn't taste like city smoke, and time away from everyone. No emails. No texts. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I just wanted to disappear for a while and breathe without feeling like the world was pushing down on my chest. The map on my phone showed fewer and fewer roads as I went farther. The last fuel station I passed was about 3 hours behind me. I hadn't seen another car since noon. Trees grew taller, denser. The light dimmed, even though it was only late afternoon. I figured it was the weather, maybe heavy clouds rolling in from the mountains. I didn't check the forecast. I didn't care. I just kept driving. The road turned to gravel, then to packed dirt, then to something that barely resembled a road at all. But the GPS still showed a path, a thin gray line stretching ahead into more nothing. I followed it, drawn by the thought of being alone somewhere far from everything. Maybe I was chasing some romantic idea of isolation. I don't know. All I know is that I saw the first house not long after the road narrowed between two steep ridges. It was an old wooden structure, squat and dark, nestled among tall trees. The windows looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. A porch sagged in front, but smoke drifted up from chimney. That surprised me. It was the first sign of life I'd seen in hours. As I kept driving, more buildings came into view. All small, old, and close together like they were holding each other up. There were maybe 30 or 40 houses, a small church with a rusted metal steeple, and what looked like a school. Everything was made of wood and stone. Everything looked like it had been there for 100 years. And everything was in shadow. The light never changed. I glanced at my phone. It was 5:52 p.m., and the sky looked exactly like it had at 2 p.m., dim like early dawn, but without the warmth. Just a cold, bluish haze hanging in the air. The sun wasn't there. Not behind clouds. Not setting. Just gone. It was light enough to see, but there was no direction to the light. No shadows. No source. Just an endless, sunless twilight. I drove to the edge of the village and parked near what looked like a central square, just a flat, open area with packed dirt and a few benches. No one was there, but I knew I was being watched. I felt it in the way curtains shifted slightly in some of the houses, how doors creaked shut when I stepped out of the car. I didn't see a single person at first, but I could feel them looking. Not with curiosity, but with caution. I didn't unpack. I just stood there for a few minutes, taking in the air. It was dry, colder than it should have been for early spring. I walked a slow circle around the square. Eventually, someone opened a door, a woman, maybe in her 50s. She stepped out just far enough for me to see her face, then turned away and went back inside. That was the only greeting I got. There was a building near the far side of the square that looked like a guest house. It had a sign, though the paint was faded. I walked toward it and tested the front door. It wasn't locked. The air inside was dry, slightly musty, but warm. There were 5 small rooms upstairs. I picked the one that faced the square, dropped my backpack on the bed, and sat down. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. Battery at 63%. The clock said 6:23 p.m. The light outside hadn't changed. I sat there for a long time, waiting for the sun to set, or rise, or do anything. But nothing changed. That's when I first noticed the quiet. No wind, no birds, no insects, just stillness, like the air was frozen. Not dead, just waiting. I thought maybe I was overtired. 12 hours of driving can do that. So I lay down, thinking I'd nap for a bit, then walk around later. When I woke up, it was exactly the same. I checked my phone. 10:17 p.m. Then again at 2:35 a.m. Then again at 5:12 a.m. The light outside the window never changed. Permanent dusk, or dawn. I couldn't tell. I looked out and saw nothing moving, not even trees swaying, just stillness. At 7:15 a.m., I left the guest house and walked. I found a small store. It was open. No one said anything. I grabbed a bottle of water and a loaf of bread, left a few notes on the counter, and left. I wasn't sure if they'd accept outside money, but I didn't care. I needed something to do, something to ground me. As I explored, I started to notice small things. No electric lights, no wires. The houses had candles and oil lamps in the windows, but none were lit. I saw people now, moving quietly, slowly, dressed simply. Most kept their heads down. No children, no music, no smoke, no smell of cooking. Just people walking silently between houses. Some sat on porches, staring into the pale light. I tried to talk to a few, but they avoided me, looked down or away. One man stood on the edge of the woods with his hands clasped behind his back. I walked up beside him, tried to speak. He didn't respond, just stood there breathing slow. I watched him for a few minutes, then walked away. The more time I spent there, the heavier everything felt, like the air itself was pressing in. And it wasn't just the light. It was the absence of normal rhythms. No day or night. No noise. No difference between morning and evening. Just an endless loop of nothing. I began writing things down. Notes in a small notebook I always carried. Times, thoughts, what I saw, just to keep my mind straight. I didn't want to forget who I was. By day 3, I was starting to slip. I'd slept maybe 6 hours total. I couldn't tell when to eat, when to rest. The light fooled me every time. I tried walking to the edge of the village, thinking I could leave. I followed the same road I came in on, but it wasn't there. I walked for an hour, maybe more. Just trees, thick, tight, too close together. The road had vanished. The GPS on my phone still showed a line, but it led straight into dense forest. No way to drive through it. No way to walk far without losing all direction. I turned back. When I returned, I found something on the bench in the square, a small bundle of matches wrapped in a cloth. No note, just sitting there, waiting. I left them where they were. That night, or what I thought was night, I sat in the guest house with a candle unlit. My hands shook, my thoughts twisted in circles. I wondered if I was still real, If I'd somehow crossed into some forgotten place that time, didn't touch. But that was just tiredness talking. I told myself it was all explainable. A geographic oddity. A place where cloud cover and valley walls trapped light in a strange way. That made sense. I could understand. But then I lit the candle. I only wanted to see the flame, just for a second. Something warm. Something alive. The moment the match flared, I heard it. A sound like dry branches cracking. Far away, but sharp. I blew the match out. Listen. Nothing. I tried again. Another match. This time I held it longer, let the candle catch. The flame danced. Then I heard footsteps. Not close. Not yet. But coming. Dozens of them. All around. I put the candle out. Held my breath. The footsteps stopped. I sat in the dark for an hour. Maybe more. I didn't dare light anything again. I understood now. This place didn't allow light. Not real light. Not flame. Not anything that pushed against the twilight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the window and watched. In the dim stillness, I saw figures moving between the trees. Not animals. Not people either. I couldn't see them clearly, but I knew they were there, staying just out of reach, waiting for another light. In the morning, the bundle of matches was gone. I walked to the far edge of the village and found an old shed. Inside were stacks of crates, supplies, canned food, lanterns, all untouched. Dust covered everything. One crate had charred edges, burned, blackened. I don't know how old the damage was, but I knew it had happened fast. Whatever had been stored there had caught fire and burned halfway through before someone put it out. The rest of the crate was empty. I left the shed and went back to the square. The villagers were there this time, standing in a wide ring around the edges, watching me. No one spoke. No one moved. Just their eyes, waiting. They didn't need to say anything. I understood. They weren't keeping the light out. They were hiding from what came for it. I had brought danger into their home by lighting that candle. They'd been safe until then. I went back to my room and didn't light anything again. The next 3 days passed like a slow fever. My hand shook. My throat stayed dry no matter how much I drank. My skin felt thin. The light never changed. The villagers stopped looking at me. I decided I had to leave, even if it meant walking. I packed my bag and filled it with water and whatever food I could find. Then I left a note in the guest house, just a few lines, in case someone ever found it. I didn't know if anyone outside even knew this place existed. I walked into the woods. At first, the trees closed in. Then they opened again, and I found something unexpected. A path. Narrow but clear. Old footprints. Broken branches. I had been moving from place to place for almost a year by the time I found the village. Teaching jobs had dried up in the city after funding cuts, and I've been taking whatever temporary contracts I could find, mostly in small towns or rural areas. It wasn't exactly how I imagined my life would turn out, especially not after all the years of training and unpaid work, but I'd come to accept it. I like the quiet. I like being far away from traffic, sirens, and everything that used to keep me up at night. It was late October when I found the village. I had just finished a short contract in a nearby town and was driving through the hills on my way to a friend's place in the south. The roads weren't well marked, and my phone's signal had dropped off 2 hours earlier. I took a turn I thought would lead back to the highway, but it must have been wrong. I ended up on a narrow road surrounded by trees, winding through small hills and patches of forest. I drove for what felt like an hour before I saw the rooftops of houses peeking out from the trees. It was beautiful. Neat rows of white houses with dark roofs, small gardens out front, and narrow paved streets that were clean and quiet. It looked like something from a photo calendar. I slowed the car, half expecting someone to wave me down for trespassing, but nobody did. I pulled into a small gravel lot near what looked like a town hall or community center. The air was crisp, and everything smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke. I wasn't planning to stay long, just wanted to ask for directions, maybe buy a cup of coffee if they had a shop. But as I walked around, I noticed how well kept everything was. The gardens were trimmed. The houses had flower boxes. Even the benches in the small park were clean and free of bird droppings or graffiti. It was the kind of place that felt too clean, too quiet. I should have noticed then that something was off, but I didn't. I ended up staying the night. One of the locals, a woman in her 50s wearing a pale blue cardigan and gardening gloves, saw me walking around and gestured for me to come over. She didn't ask any questions, just pointed me toward a guest house at the edge of the village and gave me a small smile. The guest house had a chalkboard out front with the word vacancy written on it. There was no check-in desk, just a small box where guests were told to leave cash for their stay. Everything was old but clean. I paid for 2 nights. I didn't know why at the time, but I felt like I should stay a little longer. The first thing I noticed was how friendly everyone was. People waved when I passed them. A man trimming a hedge nodded at me, like he already knew who I was. An old couple walking a dog stopped and smiled, then kept walking. Everyone looked content, not overly happy or fake, just calm, settled, like they had found exactly what they were looking for and decided to stay there forever. I spent the rest of the day walking around, trying to figure out what kind of place it was. There was a small general store, a bakery, a cafe, and what looked like a small clinic. I didn't see any logos or signs of franchises. It was all local, homemade. The cafe served hot drinks and fresh pastries. The store had neatly stacked cans, dry goods, and household supplies. Everything was so normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't until the next morning that I figured out what it was. There were no children. None. No babies. No toddlers. No teenagers. At first, I thought maybe they were in school or inside their homes, but as I walked around more, the absence started to feel louder. There were no toys in the yards, no school buses, no bicycles leaning against fences, no drawings in the cafe window, no high-pitched laughter echoing down the streets. I passed the park again and realized there wasn't a swing set or a slide, just benches and flower beds. I started watching more closely. The adults talked to each other easily, standing in small groups or walking arm in arm, but nobody mentioned picking up their kids or what grade they were in. Still, the strange part was that the village didn't feel old. Most of the people I saw were middle-aged, some younger. It wasn't a retirement community. It looked like the kind of people who should have kids. I stayed another night. I told myself it was curiosity, but if I'm honest, it was discomfort. Something in me wanted to know more. I'm not the kind of person who normally pushes boundaries, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, something woke me up. It was faint, a soft sound like distant weeping. At first, I thought it was a dream. I sat up in bed and waited, holding my breath. The sound came again, muffled crying like it was coming through a wall or from under the floor. I got up and pressed my ear to the wooden floorboards. The sound was clearer there. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, little hiccuping sobs, the kind you hear from a child who's been crying for too long. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, the village was the same. Bright, calm, peaceful. I walked down to the general store and saw a woman stacking canned soup. She smiled and mentioned something about the weather. I nodded, trying to act normal, but I kept looking at the floor of the store, wondering what was beneath it. I started paying more attention to the buildings. I looked for basement windows, bulkhead doors, anything that would suggest cellars or underground space. A few houses had low windows set into the ground, covered by grates or shrubbery. The community center had a side door that seemed to lead downstairs. I made a note of it. That afternoon, I pretended to be taking a walk and circled around the back of the community center. There was a small hatch near the base of the building, locked with a thick padlock. I leaned close and thought I heard something, just the faintest scraping sound, but it might have been my imagination. I left that night and drove to the next town. I needed internet. I needed answers. I booked a cheap motel and spent hours searching for the name of the village. It wasn't on Google Maps. The closest marker was a reservoir about 10 miles away. I found old survey records, satellite images, county files, nothing about the village. It was like it didn't officially exist. I tried looking up missing persons reports, anything about a place where children disappeared. Nothing came up. No news articles. No crime reports. It was clean. I should have stopped there, but I went back. I told myself I'd only stay one more night. I wanted to check the community center again, maybe see if I could get a look inside. I arrived around noon and walked through the village like I belonged there. A few people nodded at me again, like they remembered me. I stayed in the same guest house, same room. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until the village lights were out. Around 1 a.m., I left the guest house with a flashlight and walked to the community center. The side door I'd seen earlier was unlocked. I stepped inside and found a staircase leading down. It smelled damp like soil and mildew. I followed the stairs down to a long hallway with concrete walls and flickering lights. It was cold. I heard something up ahead, soft voices, maybe movement. I kept walking. There was a metal door at the end of the hallway. I pressed my ear to it and heard the same crying I'd heard the other night. It wasn't one child. It was many, at least a dozen. Their voices overlapped, echoing, small and broken. Some were mumbling. Some were sniffling. Some weren't crying anymore, just breathing in shallow, wet gasps. I couldn't go in. I didn't have a key. I stood there frozen, unsure of what I would even do if I got inside. I turned and left. I drove back to the motel and spent the rest of the night shaking. The next morning, I called the local police in the county seat. I didn't give my name. I just told them there was something wrong in a village about 20 miles west of the reservoir. I didn't tell them what I heard. I just said I thought there were kids being kept underground. They didn't ask questions. They just said they'd send someone to check it out. I didn't go back. I waited. 3 days later, I saw a local news headline about a welfare check in an unnamed rural community. It said that several children had been found in what authorities described as a subterranean facility. No details were given. No names. The story disappeared the next day. Taken down. Scrubbed. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. From what I gathered later, very quietly through forums and old records, the village had been a kind of experimental community. Not government-run. Private. Wealthy backers. The idea was to create a self-sustaining utopia. But they didn't want children disrupting the order. They had their own way of dealing with that. Some say the kids were born there and taken away early, locked in underground living quarters, raised in complete isolation to preserve the adult's version of perfection above. Some say the parents were told the kids were being educated somewhere else, in a separate facility. But I don't believe that. Not after hearing the cries. The parents knew, or they chose not to know. I left the country 2 months later. I don't teach anymore. I work on boats now, mostly cargo routes. I don't stay anywhere for long. But sometimes, when the engines are quiet at night, and I'm alone on deck, I still hear it. Faintly, like it's coming from below, crying that never stops. I've been studying dying languages for 10 years before I heard about the village. The lead came from an old anthropology forum, buried deep in a chain of archived posts from the late 90s. A French doctoral student mentioned, almost as a side note, that during a trek through central Anatolia, he'd heard of a village up in the hills where people spoke a language no one in the region understood, not even neighboring villagers. He tried to reach it, but turned back after a landslide blocked his route. There wasn't much else to go on. No name, no coordinates, just a vague direction and a loose mention of the Kayseri province. Normally, I wouldn't chase something so flimsy, but there was something in the way he'd written it. Dry, academic, but unsettled. It stayed with me for weeks. I kept rereading the paragraph like I was trying to find something else between the words. A whisper or a warning. I knew better than to chase ghosts, but this didn't feel like a ghost. It felt real. I cashed in 3 weeks of leave from the university, packed light. Just a field notebook, a compact audio recorder, my camera, and a Turkish-English dictionary, and flew to Ankara. From there, I took a bus toward Kayseri, asking around at stops along the way. Most people shook their heads. A few mentioned remote places up in the hills where old dialects stuck around. That wasn't unusual, but one man, a middle-aged driver in a cafe near Pınarbaşı, told me he'd heard of a place where the people didn't talk like anyone else. He called it Sessiz Koy, the silent village. But he smiled when he said it, like it was a joke or a fairy tale. He pointed north, toward the mountains. There weren't roads that led all the way there, he said. Only tracks. I rented a car for the first part of the trip, then ditched it in a village called Deresit when the asphalt ended. From there, it was a 2-day hike on footpaths that wound higher and higher. I slept the first night in a barn, the second in a shallow cave near a cold stream. I saw almost no one. No signs. No cell service. It was June, warm in the sun, but still icy in the shadows at night. The third afternoon, I crested a ridge and saw the village. It wasn't much. Maybe 30 stone houses, slate roofs, low and square, tucked into a shallow bowl of land that sloped downward toward a small stream. No cars, no power lines. Just smoke from a few chimneys and the faint sound of metal on metal tools. Maybe. I stood there for 10 minutes before I moved again, just watching, breathing. I don't know what I expected. Something older, maybe. More dramatic. But it looked almost like any other Anatolian village. That made it more interesting. Less staged. Less suspect. When I walked in, no one stopped me. A few people glanced up, mostly older, a couple children, but no one reacted like I was a stranger. No one stared. One man nodded once and kept walking. I took that as a welcome. There was no central square, no shops, just houses with small gardens and narrow paths between them. I heard voices, but I couldn't place the sounds. Not Turkish, not Kurdish, something else. Some consonants felt familiar, almost Slavic, but the rhythm was all wrong. I couldn't pick out where one word ended and another began. I kept my notebook close. That first night, I camped just outside the village boundary under a small grove of trees. I didn't want to intrude too much at once. I ate dried figs, drank from the stream, and spent hours writing what I'd seen and heard. I jotted down a few of the sounds I remembered, trying to capture the phonetics, some clicks, odd tonal rises at the end of short phrases, but no obvious borrowed words from Turkish or Arabic. The next morning, someone left a basket of flatbread and boiled eggs near my pack. No note, just food. I took it as permission. Over the next few days, I moved among the houses slowly, respectfully. I didn't speak unless someone seemed to engage me directly. They spoke their language freely, casually, to each other, but no one addressed me directly. It wasn't cold. It just seemed like they accepted my presence without needing to question it. I started to sketch a rough map of the village. Paths, houses, outbuildings. One building, a bit larger and more central, seemed to act as a communal space. People came and went during the afternoons with baskets, jugs, loaves of bread. Inside, I saw shelves of clay jars and what looked like cured meat hanging from rafters. No writing on anything, no books, no papers. That was the first strange thing. Even in the most isolated places, I usually saw at least a scrap of writing. A newspaper from years ago, a brand name, a torn label, but not here. Everything was blank or handcrafted. I tried to record their speech discreetly, but I was careful not to push. I sat outside and kept my recorder in my lap, or I turned it on when children played near the trees. The audio came back clear, but still incomprehensible. No structure I recognized. I replayed them at night in my tent, looping phrases over and over. By the fifth day, I noticed something odd in my notes. I'd written an entire sentence about one of the interactions, but 3 of the words weren't English or Turkish. At first I assumed I'd copied something phonetically and just forgotten, but the words weren't transcriptions. They looked like they belonged in the sentence, like I'd thought in them. The words Trella, Morik, and Eschen. I tried to remember what they meant. I remembered thinking they were clear when I wrote them, but now they were empty. I had no translation, just shapes. That night, I wrote everything again, slower. I forced myself to write in English. I underlined those words in red, determined to stay sharp. I couldn't afford to get sloppy. I had to stay grounded. On day 7, an older woman handed me a smooth piece of slate with symbols etched into it. Not letters, at least not from any system I knew. More like markings. Lines, curves, intersections. I took a photo and tried to give it back, but she pushed it gently toward me again. Her face was calm. Not smiling, not cold. Just neutral. That night, I stared at the slate under my headlamp. The markings repeated in a pattern, but I couldn't decode it. I tried matching them to the audio clips. No luck, but something in me kept saying it made sense. Not that it would make sense, but that it already did. I just couldn't feel it yet. That scared me more than anything else. The next morning, I woke up with the word Morik in my head. Not just as a sound, as a concept. I knew what it meant. It was the feeling of something turning inwards, like curling a leaf or holding a breath. Not fear exactly, but the start of withholding. I wrote that down. I felt ridiculous, but I wrote it. I didn't speak much out loud after that. I became worried I'd say one of their words by accident, that I'd mix languages and lose track. I started keeping 2 notebooks, one for my thoughts, one for field observations. But even then, the lines blurred. Some mornings, I'd wake and open the wrong one, then stare in confusion at pages I didn't remember writing. They weren't long, just lists, mostly words, not full sentences, but the script had changed. The loops and slants didn't match English cursive or Turkish print. They matched the marks on the slate. I hadn't noticed the shift while writing. On day 10, I stopped recording. Not out of choice. I just forgot to. I found the recorder 3 days later, buried under my clothes, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd used it. I played back the last file. My own voice whispered, counting something, 1 to 20. But by 10, the numbers weren't English or Turkish, but I counted them naturally. I couldn't recall what came after 7 in English without stopping to think. I started to panic then. I tried writing everything I knew in English. My name, my birthplace, my parents, the alphabet. I got M and froze. My hand wouldn't write it. Not because I couldn't, but because something in me said that wasn't the next symbol. The villagers weren't doing anything to me. That's what made it worse. They weren't isolating me, threatening me, or even engaging me much. But the longer I stayed, the more the village seemed to take up space in my mind, and not just the sights or sounds. The structure of it, the rhythm, the absence of writing, the silence between ideas. I couldn't think in straight lines anymore. Everything started to spiral inward. By day 15, my field notebook was useless. The pages were full of characters I didn't recognize, but I knew what they meant as I wrote them. Not translation, intention. Every entry felt less like documentation and more like transmission, as if I was storing thoughts in a system not built for English. That night, I dreamed in their language. I left the next morning without saying goodbye. It took me 3 days to reach the car. I stumbled half the time, disoriented. My mind tried to name things, rocks, clouds, insects, but the words came in sounds that weren't mine. I forced myself to hum songs I knew from childhood just to drown them out. Once I reached Duresic, I found a local bus and rode in silence. I didn't try to speak to anyone. I don't know what would have come out. Back in Ankara, I checked into a hotel and locked the door. I laid out every page of notes, every photo, every recording, and I tried to sort it. But it was useless. The English was almost gone. I was somewhere near the border between the hills and the lower plains, carrying everything I owned in a faded gray backpack that had started to fray along the seams. The straps had dug red marks into my shoulders, and every muscle in my legs felt like it had been slowly ripped apart. I hadn't seen another person in hours, just hills, stone, weeds, and an occasional crow standing on a rock like it owned the world. My phone had long since lost signal. I kept it in my back pocket anyway, checking it every now and then out of habit, even though I knew it wouldn't light up. It had started as just another hike. I'd done this sort of thing before, go somewhere remote, clear my head, avoid people. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. It was just a cheap way to travel. Carry your own food, sleep in a bivy sack, keep moving. I had a crude map that showed a cluster of villages further inland, marked with red dots, but no names. One looked promising. It sat in a small valley with a water source nearby. I figured I could rest there for a day, get some food if they had a shop, and maybe find a place to sleep that didn't involve ants crawling into my socks. The sun was low by the time I reached the edge of the village. I passed through some scattered fields and a cluster of abandoned buildings, sheds maybe, or homes that had fallen apart. The Real village sat tucked below a slope. It wasn't visible from the hills until you were practically on top of it. A stone wall lined the perimeter. It was low, no more than waist high, but solid and old. It was made from stacked rocks, some of them worn smooth by wind or time. A narrow dirt road wound through the middle, packed tight with the passing of wheels or hooves. At first, it felt like I'd stumbled onto a film set. People stood in clusters, wearing what looked like traditional clothes, loose-fitting fabric in natural tones, nothing flashy or modern. Some women had headscarves. Some men wore shirts tucked into warm belts. And the silence. It was so quiet I could hear the wind tugging at my sleeves and the creak of a wooden sign swinging from metal bracket. The only sound other than the wind was music, faint but rhythmic. Drums, steady, repetitive low. It echoed off the stone walls. I stepped through an open gate. No one stopped me. No one even looked surprised. In fact, they didn't react at all. They just kept dancing. That's when I realized it wasn't complete silence. There was movement, a lot of it. People were spinning in circles, others moving in unison. Their feet kicked up small clouds of dust. Some children ran between the adults, holding lengths of ribbon or cloth, waving them through the air like streamers. There were tables lined with food. I saw loaves of bread, bowls filled with nuts and berries, cured meat laid out in long strips, jugs of water, and something that looked like wine or maybe fruit juice sat untouched. Plates had been filled and left on the tables. No one ate. It all felt staged. A display, like a festival that wasn't really meant to be enjoyed. I walked slowly, half expecting someone to finally acknowledge me. I thought about waving or saying hello, but something about the atmosphere made me keep quiet. I figured maybe it was a local celebration, and they didn't want tourists crashing the moment. Still, I kept walking deeper into the village, drawn by the smell of food and the steady rhythm of the drums. I passed a man spinning in place with his arms out, eyes fixed on something in the sky. His face was calm, peaceful even. Others danced in wide circles, their steps slow and deliberate. No one smiled. No one talked. There were no phones, no laughter, just motion. The way their feet moved reminded me of old rituals I'd seen in documentaries. Time steps, turns, sequences. I felt like an intruder, but I was tired, and my stomach had started to twist itself into knots. So I picked up a piece of bread from a table near the edge of the square and took a bite. No one stopped me. The crust was hard, but the inside was still soft, dense with herbs or something I couldn't place. I took a second piece. My throat was dry, so I poured a small cup of the wine-like drink. It tasted like fermented fruit, strong but smooth. I found a spot near a stone wall and sat, watching the dancers. The sun dipped lower, casting everything in a golden light. My limbs started to loosen. My feet throbbed in my boots. The warmth of the drink settled in my stomach, easing the ache for a moment. As it got darker, the rhythm of the drums slowed. Lanterns were lit along the main road. Real flame, not electric. The flickering light painted everyone's faces in orange and yellow. Shadows grew long. The dancers moved slower now, like their bodies were running out of momentum. But still no one talked. Even the children had quieted. Then the drums stopped. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow fade, each beat further apart than the last, until there was nothing. The silence that followed hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Every sound I made felt too loud. I could hear myself breathing. My boots scuffed the ground when I stood. And that's when I noticed everyone had stopped dancing. They stood still. Hundreds of them, all facing the same direction, toward me. I froze. My hands went cold. I wasn't sure what I'd done. My mind raced. Was I not supposed to eat? Had I broken some rule? Then the crowd parted. A man stepped forward. At least, I think it was a man. He was tall, lean, and wore a robe that dragged slightly behind him on the dirt. His face was hidden behind a mask, plain, oval, with no features except two eye holes. The mask looked like it had been carved from wood. Cracks ran down the side. He held something in his hand, a rope, coiled, thick, like something you'd use to tie down a bow or cattle. He didn't move quickly. He walked with purpose, slow and deliberate, until he stood a few feet from me. The crowd behind him didn't move. Their heads turned slowly as he walked past, eyes locked on me the whole time. I didn't know what to do. My heart was thumping against my ribs, so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I held my hands up slightly, like a gesture of peace. I wasn't even sure if that meant anything here. The man didn't react. He held out the rope, arms straight, like he wanted me to take it. I didn't move. He stepped forward and let the rope fall on my feet. Then he stepped back. That was it. No one spoke. No one moved. The wind blew, tugging at the loose cloth of their clothing. The lanterns flickered. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I bent slowly, picked up the rope. My fingers brushed the coarse fibers. It was heavier than I expected. Then the crowd turned. All of them, at once. They walked back toward the center of the village. Not fast, not slow, like a procession. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the fear of being left alone. Maybe I thought playing along would keep me safe. Maybe I thought they were going to explain something. Maybe I just didn't want to find out what would happen if I didn't. They led me to the largest building in the village, a hall made of stone and wood, its roof steep and thatched. The doors were open. Inside, torches burned on the walls. There were rows of benches and an open space in the center. A wooden beam stretched across the ceiling, supported by thick posts. They stood around the edges of the hall, forming a perfect ring. No one entered the center. The man with the mask walked to the middle and pointed at the rope in my hands. Then he looked up at the beam. I understood. He wanted me to hang the rope. I didn't know if I could. My hand shook. Sweat ran down my back despite the chill that had crept into the air. But I moved slowly, carefully. I climbed onto a low stool and looped the rope over the beam. The other end hung just above the floor. When I stepped back, the masked man nodded. Then he left. Everyone left. They filed out in silence, leaving me alone in the hall with the hanging rope. I stood there for what felt like an hour. I couldn't stop staring at the rope, the shadows it cast on the floor, the way it swayed slightly in the breeze. I didn't sleep that night. I sat against the wall, eyes locked on the door. No one returned. In the morning, the rope was still there. The village was empty, completely empty. Tables cleared. No food. No dancers. No people. Just empty homes, shuttered windows, locked doors. I walked through every street, every alley. Nothing. I packed my bag and left. I don't know what I walked into. A ritual? A test? A warning? The rope hadn't been for me. That much I know. They would have used it themselves if it was. I think they wanted me to understand something, that sometimes you're not meant to watch, not meant to walk in, not meant to take. Some things are not for you. And if you do take bread, water, space, you carry the rope. Not to hang, to remember. I still have it, coiled at the bottom of my pack. Heavy, rough, waiting. We hadn't planned to take the mountain road. It was just a random choice, a turn made without much thought. The GPS had suggested the highway, but I've been driving for hours, and something about the narrow road cutting through the hills felt like the change we needed. My girlfriend, Mara, had been asleep in the passenger seat with her knees tucked up, arms folded across her chest. She stirred when the asphalt turned to a coarser, grittier surface and the sound changed beneath the tires. It was late afternoon when we found the village. The road snaked around a steep bluff, then dropped into a small basin. The houses were clustered tightly, made of rough stone and faded wood, with tiled roofs that looked worn but clean. There were no signs, no billboards, no names, no stores or advertisements. Just a single gas station with a rusted pump, a bakery-looking place with no windows, and an inn. Then caught my eye because of the way it sat slightly higher than the rest, with its front porch looking out over a flat patch of grass where a few kids were playing. I parked near the edge of the village. We got out, stretched our legs. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. The wind was cool, but not cold. It was quiet, too quiet, but peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. No engine noises, no music, no honking, just the distant echo of a bird call and the creak of an old wind vane somewhere behind the buildings. The inn had no sign, just a door with a brass handle and a short row of windows. Inside, the lobby was simple, wooden floor, a few chairs, a fireplace, a staircase leading up. There was a small desk, and behind it, a man emerged from a back room when he heard us enter. He wore a dark shirt tucked into gray slacks and nodded politely. I pointed upstairs and held up one finger to signal we wanted a room. He nodded again, handed me a key from a small row of hooks on the wall, and scribbled something into a logbook. That night, we showered, lay on the bed, and listened to the wind moving through the valley. No TV, no signal, no Wi-Fi. My phone said no service in the corner. I found it oddly calming. The next morning, we got dressed, packed up, and loaded our bags into the car. I turned the engine over, and we followed the road back the way we came. Or at least I thought we did. After about 15 minutes of driving uphill through dense pine forest, the road curved again, then dipped sharply. When we cleared the trees, I saw the familiar shape of the gas station and the little grass field near the inn. I frowned and slowed the car. Mara looked up from her phone. She noticed it too. We hadn't made any turns. We hadn't seen any junctions. The road had just looped. I figured I'd made a mistake. Maybe there had been a fork in the road I hadn't seen. So we tried again. I drove slower this time. Looked for signs. Any branching path. Nothing. Just one solid strip of cracked asphalt cutting through the trees. Again, after climbing a while, the road bent, dropped, and the village appeared ahead. Same view. Same kids playing on the grass. We tried 3 more times. Always the same outcome. There was no cell service, no internet. GPS didn't work, just showed a gray screen with a spinning icon. I even tried to set a pin at the start of the road, so I could track if we were actually moving forward or just being redirected somehow. The pin never moved. By evening, I was exhausted and confused. We stayed another night at the inn. No questions from a man behind the desk. He didn't ask if we were extending our stay or if anything was wrong. He just handed me the same key. I didn't sleep well that night. My brain kept replaying the road in my head, trying to figure out how it could be folding back in on itself. I'd grown up in a city, but I wasn't stupid when it came to basic geography. The road had a steady incline. We passed the same landmarks: boulders, tree clusters, a rusted guardrail with 3 missing posts. Then somehow, without making any turn, we ended up back where we started. The third morning, I got up early, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. Mara was still asleep. I decided to walk. I followed the road on foot. I counted my steps, marked trees with small scratches from my key. I walked for nearly 2 hours before the light through the trees started to look familiar. When I came out of the curve, the village was there. It was like the road was folding me back, curving reality itself. But I refused to believe that. There had to be an explanation. We tried asking the villagers the next day, not with words, but with gestures. I pointed at the road, made a driving motion with my hands, then opened my palms in a confused shrug. One old man gave a small shrug back and walked off. A woman selling something in baskets just shook her head, then pointed at the dirt under her feet. That didn't help. That afternoon, I searched the edge of the village for any other roads. Dirt paths, hiking trails, anything. There were none. Behind the buildings were more hills with dense, sloping pine forests. No signs of other routes, driveways, even animal tracks. I hiked in the trees for an hour and found nothing but moss, roots, and dead leaves. We rationed the food in the car. The inn didn't seem to charge us. I would leave money on the counter each morning, but it was never taken. I stopped bothering after a while. We tried sleeping in the car, thinking maybe not staying at the inn would break the pattern. But it didn't. No matter what we did, every route led us back. On the 5th day, we tried to follow the sun. We waited until noon, marked the direction it rose, and walked directly away from it, straight into the trees. We kept to the same heading. I checked my compass constantly, made marks on rocks and trees. We walked for 5 hours. When we finally came down a slope into a small clearing, I saw the same cluster of rooftops beyond the grass. The village. We didn't speak much after that. Mara started to withdraw. She lay in the bed most of the day. I stayed out, walking the edges, trying to see what I missed. I began to suspect that maybe this wasn't about the roads. Maybe the road didn't matter. Maybe it was the village. I studied the layout. Every building had a specific place. They were arranged in tight order, almost too deliberate. I noticed the same people standing in the same places every day. The woman with the baskets never ran out of whatever she was selling. The kids on the grass always had the same ball with the same clothes. I started writing down what I saw. The man behind the counter at the inn was always there. Never aged, never seemed tired. But he wasn't supernatural, just predictable. Mechanical. After 2 weeks, I found a garage. A low building behind the inn. Inside was a single rusted truck with its hood up. No tools, no oil stains, no smell of fuel, just a truck. I opened the door and sat inside. The key was in the ignition. I turned it. Nothing. The engine didn't even click. Just silence. One night, I followed the stream behind the village. It ran clear, fast over rocks. I followed it upstream for miles. The forest got thicker, the air colder. Eventually, I found the source, a spring in the rocks. But just past it, maybe 20 feet beyond, the ground changed. It looked almost artificial. Not fake, but interrupted. The way the moss grew, the way the stones were arranged. It was like everything had been stopped there, like the landscape had hit a boundary. I threw a rock past the line. It landed, rolled, stopped. I stepped over it. Nothing happened, but the terrain ahead was wrong. The incline was too perfect. The trees were evenly spaced. The birds stopped singing. I walked for 10 more minutes before the trees opened up again, and I stepped out onto a road. It was the same road. Somehow, no matter how I tried to leave, every path was part of the loop. I couldn't see the loop, couldn't feel it, but it was there, turning me around without me knowing. A hidden perimeter, a trap without walls. I started testing things. I tied strings to tree trunks and followed them. I built small cairns of rock as trail markers. I used powder chalk to dust my boots and track the prints. But no matter what I did, after a certain point, the environment reset. My strings were gone. My chalk prints disappeared. The rock piles were knocked over. Weeks passed. We ran out of food. Ben had some supplies in a cabinet near the stairs. Cans, dried fruit, rice. I started taking them. No one stopped me. No one acknowledged it. Mara barely moved. She spoke less each day, until she didn't speak at all. Eventually, I found a ledger in a back room of the inn. It was buried under dust. The names inside were handwritten, many faded. They were grouped by year. The entries stopped 10 years ago. I flipped through the pages. Hundreds of names, each followed by a date of arrival. No departures. The last name on the list, written in smudged pencil, was E. Harris. It was mine. I didn't remember signing anything. That night, I slept on the porch of the inn. I didn't dream. The wind kept me awake. In the morning, I walked the road one more time. When the trees opened up and I saw the village again, I didn't turn back. I parked the car, walked into the woods, and started digging. I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I just wanted to find the edge. The truth was, there were no roads out because we were never supposed to leave. Not by car, not on foot. The village wasn't supernatural.